A janitor just saved a child's life in 3 seconds flat, with the precision of a ghost and the reflexes of a man who has killed before. Nobody noticed. Nobody asked questions. He simply picked up his mop and walked away. But she noticed. And what she uncovered beneath the worn uniform, the quiet smile, and the calloused hands would shatter everything she thought she knew about the man sweeping her floors. This is a story about war, sacrifice, a father's love, and the terrifying price of a second chance. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Like, and stay with us till the very end. The morning started like every other morning in the Helios district, with noise. The city had a way of announcing itself before dawn even properly broke. A relentless chorus of delivery trucks grinding through narrow side streets, construction crews hammering steel against steel 40 stories above the pavement, and the endless mechanical groan of the elevated rail system that cut through the heart of downtown like a scar that never quite healed. By 6:15, the sidewalks of Meridian Avenue were already dense with commuters, their shoulders hunched against the sharp October air, their eyes fixed on phones and coffee cups, and the invisible middle distance that city people stare into when they want the world to leave them alone. The Helios Innovations Tower rose above all of it, 62 floors of steel and glass that caught the morning sun and threw it back like a challenge. It was the kind of building designed to make people feel small, and it succeeded. The lobby alone was the size of a cathedral, all polished white marble and soaring ceilings, populated by security guards in charcoal suits and receptionists who smiled the exact same smile at everyone who walked through the revolving doors. By 7 a.m., the maintenance crew was already halfway through their morning sweep. Lucas Hale pushed his cart through the lobby with the quiet, unhurried efficiency that had made him invisible to almost everyone in the building. He was 38 years old, medium height, the kind of lean that spoke of hard use rather than vanity, the kind of body that looked ordinary in a maintenance uniform and would look extraordinary in almost anything else. His face was angular and weathered in a way that suggested long stretches outdoors in conditions that weren't particularly forgiving. His hair was dark and cut short, and he wore it the same way every day without appearing to think about it. His eyes were the color of smoke, gray and still, with the particular quality of eyes that had learned to watch everything at once without appearing to watch anything at all. He was, in every visible sense, completely unremarkable. That was the point. At 7:42, the construction drone lost control. It happened fast, the way catastrophes always happened in cities, where the density of people and machinery and moving parts created 1,000 near misses every hour, and every now and then one of them became the real thing. The drone was a mid-sized survey unit operating under contract from a construction firm working on the building directly across from Helios Tower. It had been functioning normally all morning, running its mapping route on autopilot, when something in its navigation system corrupted. A software fault that would later be traced to a firmware update pushed 3 days too early. The rotors hiccuped. The unit spun hard to the left. And then it was falling, not cleanly downward, but at a vicious lateral angle, its propellers still churning, its body rotating, its 63 pounds of aluminum and composite casing hurtling toward the crowded sidewalk at a speed that made it lethal. People scattered. The sound alone was enough. A high, oscillating shriek from the failing motors, and then the sudden collective scream of 20 people throwing themselves sideways, diving behind parked cars, pressing themselves flat against the building's exterior wall. It was pure animal instinct, the species' oldest software overriding everything else. Move, survive, get away from the thing that is going to kill you. Almost everyone moved. Almost. Tante. His name was Ethan, and he was 5 years old, and he was frozen. He stood in the middle of the sidewalk in a red jacket with a cartoon bear on the pocket, clutching a small backpack shaped like a turtle. And he did not move because he did not understand what was happening fast enough to respond to it. The noise was too loud, the movement too sudden, the adult world too complicated. His father had been right beside him one moment, stepping briefly to hold the lobby door for an elderly woman. And in that half-second of separation, the crowd had surged, and Ethan had been left alone on the open pavement. He looked up. The drone was 30 feet away and dropping fast, spinning like a thrown knife, its shadow racing across the sidewalk toward him. He opened his mouth. He never got to scream. Lucas Hale was already moving. He had seen it before Ethan did, before most people did, because he had spent years training himself to process threat information at a speed that no amount of ordinary experience could produce. He registered the drone's malfunction, calculated its trajectory, identified Ethan's position, and made the decision in a time frame that the human brain was not supposed to be capable of. Later, when people tried to describe what they had witnessed, they would struggle to find the right words. He just appeared, someone would tell the police. 1 second he wasn't there, and then he was. He hit the pavement sliding, his knees taking the impact with practiced indifference, his arms coming up and around Ethan in a movement so controlled it looked choreographed, one arm wrapping the boy's torso, the other bracing against the sidewalk, rotating his own body between the child and the incoming impact zone. He covered Ethan completely, curling around him the way a shell closes around the thing it was built to protect. The drone hit the lamppost 3 feet away. The impact was savage. A shriek of metal, a shower of sparks and composite fragments, the lamppost swaying drunkenly on its base before holding. A rotor blade spun free and skated across the pavement with a sound like a circular saw. A piece of the drone's casing struck Lucas across the left shoulder blade with enough force to stagger a smaller man. He didn't stagger. He stayed exactly where he was, curled over the boy, until he was certain the debris field was finished. Then, in one smooth motion, he rose to his feet, lifting Ethan with him, and checked the child with the rapid, systematic efficiency of someone who had performed battlefield casualty assessments in conditions far worse than this. Eyes tracking. Good. Breathing. Good. No obvious injury. Minor scratches from the scramble. Nothing more. "Hey," Lucas said, and his voice was perfectly calm, the way a voice is calm when the person behind it has trained the panic out of themselves at great cost. "You're okay. You're okay, bud. Look at me." Ethan looked at him. His lower lip was trembling with the effort of not crying. "You're okay," Lucas said again, and this time he smiled. A small, real smile. And something about it worked, because Ethan's lips stopped trembling. Then Lucas set the boy gently on his feet, brushed the dust from his own knees, picked up his maintenance cart from where it had toppled in his sprint, and went back to work. The whole sequence had taken 11 seconds. Elena Cross had watched every one of them. She had been standing at the lobby entrance when it happened, a leather portfolio under one arm and a half-finished coffee in her hand, about to begin what her calendar described as a full day of decisions she'd already made but had to pretend to deliberate over. She was 35 years old and had been CEO of Helios Innovations for 4 years, which meant she had spent 4 years being the most prepared person in any given room, and she had learned to trust that quality about herself the way other people trusted in luck. She had not been prepared for this. She stood very still for a long moment after the drone came down, the coffee going cold in her hand, watching the maintenance worker, Lucas Hale, level 3 custodial staff, she would later learn, return to his cart as though he had done nothing more remarkable than pick up a piece of litter. Around her, the sidewalk was erupting into the chaotic aftermath that followed any near disaster. People calling out to each other, someone on their phone already, a security guard sprinting from the lobby, voices layering over each other in shock and relief, and the particular breathless energy of people who had just remembered that they were alive. Lucas moved through none of it. He existed in the center of the commotion the way a stone exists in a river, present but unmoved, letting the current break around him. Who is that? Elena thought. She wasn't sure she'd ever wondered that about an employee before. Later, in her office on the 44th floor, Elena pulled up the internal personnel file for Lucas Hale. It didn't tell her much. Employed 14 months, prior employment listed as contract security and logistics. No gaps that would trigger an HR flag, no disciplinary records. Performance reviews described him as thorough, self-sufficient, and requires minimal supervision. One supervisor had written, in a note that Elena found herself reading twice, Hale never asks for anything. Doesn't complain, does the job and then some. Honestly, don't know much about him personally. Keeps to himself. There was a next of kin field listing one dependent. Ethan Hale, son, age 6. She closed the file and sat back. She had built her career on reading people, on walking into a room full of investors or competitors or skeptical board members and understanding within minutes what they actually wanted and what they were actually afraid of. It was the talent she trusted most in herself, more than her technical knowledge or her business instincts or her ability to work 18-hour days without losing her edge. The maintenance worker had given her nothing to read. That, she decided, was in itself a kind of information. The first real conversation happened 4 days later in the rooftop garden on the 58th floor. The garden was an architectural afterthought that had become, over time, one of the best-kept secrets in the building. A narrow, L-shaped terrace lined with planters, fitted with a small seating area that faced east and caught the afternoon sun. Most executives used it for phone calls or quiet lunches. Most staff didn't know it existed. Elena went there when she needed to think without anyone watching her think. She found Lucas Hale there on a Thursday afternoon, kneeling beside a drip irrigation line that had been malfunctioning for 2 weeks. Facilities management had put in a work order. Apparently, Lucas had decided not to wait for it to be assigned. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. His expression was neutral, not wary, exactly, but precise. The way a man looks when he's already assessed whether something constitutes a threat before his face has time to arrange itself into social normalcy. "Sorry," he said, beginning to stand. "I'll clear out." "Don't." Elena moved past him to the small bench and sat down. "You're not bothering me." He held her gaze for a moment, then went back to the irrigation line. She watched the city below. The glass and steel, the moving traffic, the particular way that distance turned chaos into something that almost looked like order, and let the silence sit between them for a minute before she spoke. "That was you," she said. 4 days ago. On the sidewalk." His hands kept moving on the irrigation fitting. "Work order for this line's been open 2 weeks," he said. "Figured I'd get to it." "That's not what I asked about." He was quiet. She watched the line of his shoulders and noticed that they hadn't tensed. He wasn't uncomfortable exactly. He was thinking. "The kid is okay," he said finally. "I know. He's your son." His hand stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. When he did, his face was unreadable in the way of someone who had practiced being unreadable for a very long time. "You ran my file." "I'm the CEO. I run everyone's file." She paused. "His name is Ethan?" Something shifted in his expression at the name. Not softness, exactly, but a change in the quality of his stillness. The way a very controlled thing relaxes, just slightly, when it encounters something it doesn't have to be controlled around. "Yeah," he said. "Ethan." "How old?" 6 in December. Elena nodded. She looked back out at the city. "What you did," she said, "was not normal. I was close. I had time to react. You slid 10 feet across a concrete sidewalk and put yourself between a falling drone and a child in under 2 seconds. She let the number land. "I've run the security footage. The timestamp is there." Lucas said nothing. "You don't have to explain it to me," Elena said in Shmut. "I'm not asking you to." He blinked. She could see that he hadn't expected that. People who moved the way he moved, who kept themselves the way he kept himself, were usually waiting for the other shoe, for the question that cracked the door open, the inquiry that turned into an interrogation. He had prepared himself for that shoe, and she had just told him it wasn't coming. "Okay," he said after a moment. "Okay," she agreed. She stood, picked up the portfolio she'd set on the bench, and started back toward the door. Then she stopped. "The irrigation line," she said. "The main junction is about 8 inches to the left of where you're working. There's a pressure valve that's probably cracked. You'll see a hairline fracture on the underside." Lucas looked at the line, then back at her. "My first job in college," she said by way of explanation, "was landscaping. I know drip systems." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite name, something between surprise and recalibration. And then, slowly, he almost smiled. "Thank you," he said. She nodded and went inside. Over the weeks that followed, something shifted in the building's ecosystem without anyone remarking on it. Elena began taking her afternoon coffee break on the rooftop. Lucas, whose maintenance schedule happened to include the rooftop terrace on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, began timing his work there accordingly. The conversations that resulted were, on the surface, unremarkable. The kind of thing that would read as nothing on a surveillance camera. 2 people talking near a row of planters, their voices low, their body language that of colleagues rather than anything else. But the content was different. "What does Ethan want to be when he grows up?" Elena asked one Tuesday. Lucas considered this with the seriousness he apparently gave to everything. Last week it was a firefighter. Week before that, a dinosaur. A dinosaur isn't a profession. You try explaining that to a 6-year-old. Elena laughed, a real laugh, not a CEO laugh, not the practiced warmth she deployed in conference rooms. Lucas heard the difference and found that it did something small and significant to the wall he'd spent years building and maintaining around himself. He noted it the way he noted most things, filed, relevant, not yet fully processed. "What is he like?" she asked. "Everything with wheels. Anything that makes noise, pickles, but only on Tuesdays for reasons I've never successfully determined." He paused. "Drawing. He draws a lot." "What does he draw?" "Buildings, mostly, cars, and—" He stopped. "And?" Lucas looked at the city. "People," he said. "He draws a lot of people." "Who?" "Me," he said. "His teacher, Miss Okafor. And lately—" He stopped again, and this time the pause had a different quality. Something careful in it, something being decided. "He drew the lobby last week, from when the drone came down. He drew you." Elena went very still. "He called you the glass lady," Lucas continued, his voice completely neutral, "because of the building." "That's—" She paused. "That's actually very accurate." Lucas looked at her sideways, and this time the almost smile made it all the way to a real one. It changed his face significantly, like a light coming on in a room you thought was empty. "He's a perceptive kid," Elena said. "Yeah," Lucas agreed, and there was something in the single syllable that carried a weight of feeling far larger than the word itself. The incident with Marcus Dyer happened on a Wednesday morning, and it was what cracked the carefully maintained surface of what Lucas was and had been. Marcus was a senior data analyst on the 22nd floor who had been complaining of headaches for 3 days. On Wednesday, he made it as far as the lobby before his body made the decision his stubbornness had been avoiding. He collapsed on the marble floor near the security desk with the particular sudden totality of someone whose system has reached a limit and simply stopped. The lobby erupted. A security guard sprinted over and immediately pulled out his phone, which was the right instinct but not the most useful one in the next 30 seconds. 2 colleagues who'd been with Marcus crouched beside him, saying his name repeatedly as though repetition might help. Someone knocked over a standing display near the reception desk. 3 people moved in close and then immediately pulled back because proximity to a medical emergency without knowing what to do is just crowd control that makes things worse. Lucas was at the opposite end of the lobby, changing a burned-out light panel. By the time he reached Marcus, he had already assessed from 30 feet out. The fall had been controlled enough to rule out full cardiac arrest. The body position suggested a vascular event or severe hypotension. The face was not cyanotic. He was working on probabilities the way he had always worked. Not certainty, but the best available answer given available data. "Move back," he said, and the particular quality of his voice, not loud, but carrying an authority so absolute it bypassed the social negotiation most commands required, cleared a radius around Marcus immediately. "Give him air, you—" He pointed at the security guard with the phone. "You're already calling. Good. Stay on the line. Tell them probable syncope, possible TIA, no head trauma from the fall, he needs to stay flat. Don't let him sit up." He knelt beside Marcus, 2 fingers to the carotid, eyes going to his watch. Then checking pupils, airway, the quality of Marcus's breathing. His hands moved with an efficiency that had no hesitation in it, no uncertainty. The efficiency of someone for whom emergency medical response was not a crisis, but a procedure. "Marcus," he said clearly. "My name is Lucas. I work in this building. Paramedics are on their way. I need you to stay still and breathe normally. Can you hear me?" A weak sound from Marcus. His eyes fluttered. "Good," Lucas said. "That's good. Keep breathing." He maintained the assessment, kept Marcus's airway clear, monitored his pulse. All of it performed with the precise, unhurried competence of someone who had done this in conditions that made a marble lobby look like a controlled laboratory environment. When the paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, Lucas gave them a clean handoff: vitals, timeline, suspected cause, observations. Like reading from a chart he'd already written. The paramedics glanced at each other with the look of professionals recognizing another professional. Then Lucas stood, excused himself from the knot of concerned colleagues, and went back to the light panel. Elena had seen the whole thing from the mezzanine level. She came down the stairs slowly, watching him work on the light panel. His back to the room, his posture settled back into its customary ordinariness, as if the last 8 minutes had been simply another task on a long list. She stood beside him. He didn't look up. "I know." "What was that?" "First aid." "That was not first aid." She kept her voice low. Around them, the lobby was returning to its ordinary morning rhythm, the aftermath of the crisis folding back into the noise. "That was a paramedic-level assessment and response, at minimum." Lucas kept his attention on the light panel. He removed a failed module, set it aside, reached for the replacement. "Lucas." He stopped. He put the module down with great care. He didn't turn around. His hands were very still on the maintenance cart. "I've lived a different life," he said quietly. "I know. That life is over." "I'm not suggesting it isn't." He turned then, and she was struck again by his eyes. That quality of stillness in them, smoke gray and watchful, with something deeper behind them that looked like a long history of keeping it from showing. "I have a son," he said. "Everything I do is about making sure his life is safe and normal and undisturbed. That means the person I used to be." He stopped, chose his words carefully. "That person doesn't exist anymore." Elena held his gaze. "I'm not asking about who you used to be," she said, "and I'm not asking about anything you're not willing to tell me." He looked at her. He was running some kind of internal calculation. She could see it, the same quality she saw in his eyes when he assessed physical situations, now turned inward. "You could," he said. "Ask if you wanted to." "I could." "You won't?" "I believe people have the right to the boundaries of their own story." She said it simply, without performance. "Whatever you've done, whatever you were, that's yours. You don't owe it to me or to anyone." The lobby moved around them, indifferent. Lucas looked at her for a long time. Something in his expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but changed, the way a long-held tension changes when the thing that required it no longer exists. "Thank you," he said. And it came out different from the thank you he'd given her about the irrigation line. Heavier, more careful, like the word was carrying real freight. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just keep an eye on that pressure valve when you're on the roof on Thursday." She walked away. Behind her, after a moment, she heard the quiet sound of him resuming work. She didn't sleep well that night. Elena Cross had not survived 4 years at the top of a company in a brutally competitive sector by being careless with her instincts. She had made decisions that cost tens of millions of dollars on the strength of a feeling, and she had been right often enough to trust that those feelings were data, not noise. The instinct that told her a business partnership was sound, and the instinct that told her a person was trustworthy came from the same source, and she had long since stopped second-guessing either one. What she felt about Lucas Hale was not romantic. Not yet, though she was honest enough with herself to file that qualifier rather than simply erasing it. What she felt was something older and more fundamental, the recognition that came from meeting someone who was operating at a level of genuine authenticity that most people never reached. The ones who'd survived something, the ones who'd looked at the worst of themselves and of the world and had decided deliberately what to keep and what to set down. She had met people who'd been through difficulty before. They wore it differently, usually loudly, as an identity, as a claim on the world's sympathy, or they wore it as anger, a sourness that stained everything they touched. Lucas wore it the way load-bearing walls wear weight. You couldn't see the force being absorbed. You could only see that he was still standing. She lay in the dark of her apartment and thought about a 6-year-old who drew pictures of the people in his father's world. She thought about what it meant that the boy had drawn her. She thought about eyes the color of smoke and a voice that moved through a crisis like a hand moving through still water. "You're going to be careful," she told herself. It was good advice. She was not entirely sure she was going to take it. Thursday morning, Lucas found her already on the rooftop when he arrived with his maintenance kit. She had 2 coffee cups from the building's ground floor cafe. Not the good stuff from the executive floor, the ordinary stuff. The kind that cost $2 and came in paper cups that got warm and then went cold too fast. She held one out to him without ceremony. He took it. He looked at it. He looked at her. "The valve," she said. "Hairline fracture, exactly where I said." Yeah, he agreed. "You were right. I'm often right. I've noticed that." She smiled. He didn't quite smile, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that she had begun to catalog as his version of one. They stood in the October air and drank mediocre coffee and looked out over the city, and neither of them spoke for a while, which was, Lucas realized, with a kind of quiet astonishment, perfectly comfortable. He could not recall the last time silence with another person had felt like something you could rest in rather than something you had to manage. "Tell me about Ethan," she said. And he did, slowly at first, then less slowly. About the boy's absolute conviction that blue was the superior color, about the elaborate rules he'd invented for a card game he'd made up himself, about the way he fell asleep with one arm thrown over the top of his head, about the morning ritual of choosing which of his 3 pairs of sneakers was the right sneaker for the specific emotional demands of the day. Small things, the things that constituted a life. Elena listened. She asked questions, real questions, not polite ones, questions that showed she was tracking the details and building a picture. At some point, Lucas realized he was smiling, not the small, professional, nothing wrong here smile he wore at work, a real one. It felt unfamiliar on his face, like clothes he hadn't worn in a long time that he'd forgotten he owned. He noticed Elena noticing it. "He sounds remarkable," she said. "He is," Lucas said, with the uncomplicated conviction of a man who had decided long ago that this was the one thing in his life he was allowed to be sure of. "He gets it from somewhere," she said. Lucas looked at his coffee cup. He didn't answer, but she hadn't really asked. The lobby was busy at 5:15 when Lucas and Ethan waited for their cab home. Ethan was in his red jacket, turtle backpack, today's sneaker choice apparently reflecting a mood that required both Velcro straps instead of just one. He was holding his father's hand and narrating, at considerable length and volume, the events of his school day. A story that had so far involved a fire drill, a substitute art teacher, a disagreement about whose turn it was on the good puzzle, and a discovery of considerable scientific significance relating to what happens when you put a raisin in lemonade. Lucas listened with absolute attention. This was not performance. This was Lucas's default mode with his son. Full presence, complete engagement, as though Ethan's narration of a Tuesday in first grade deserved the same quality of attention he'd once given to mission briefings. And then Jacob said it was his turn, but it wasn't because I traded him the markers for it last week. Lucas felt it before he understood what he was feeling. The slight shift in air pressure that came with the large door opening. The particular displacement of the lobby crowd, subtle, directional. The peripheral registration of a figure moving toward him with a purposefulness that didn't match the surrounding flow. His hand tightened, briefly and involuntarily, around Ethan's. And Ms. Okafor said we had to take turns properly, but... "Ethan," Lucas's voice perfectly calm. "Buddy, look. There's the news screen. You see the robot thing?" He angled the boy gently toward the lobby's large display screen, creating a half rotation that put Ethan facing away, then turned himself to face the man who was almost beside him now. He knew the face. He'd been hoping, for 14 months, that he would never see it again. The man was older than Lucas remembered, or perhaps just worn differently. He had the kind of lean that came from a life that didn't allow the body any margin. His hair was close-cropped and gray at the temples. He wore a business suit that fit well enough to have been chosen rather than assigned, which told Lucas that whatever he was doing now, it wasn't covert work. He was standing in the middle of the Helios Tower lobby at 5:15 on a Thursday afternoon, which told Lucas something else. This is not a warning. This is a message. His name was Devlin. They had served together for 4 years in a unit that didn't exist, doing work that had never been formally acknowledged. They had saved each other's lives. Lucas counted twice, Devlin probably counted more, depending on how you define the word. Hail, Devlin said. His voice was quiet and even. Professional courtesy among professionals. Devlin. Lucas kept his own voice neutral, kept his body between Devlin and Ethan. It wasn't a threatening posture, just a matter of physics, of where he was and where Ethan was. This isn't a great place. I know. I needed to know you were here before I said anything. You've known where I was for 14 months. A fractional pause. Yes? But you're here now. Things have developed. The Devlin's eyes tracked to Ethan. Briefly, non-threatening, the recognition of a man who understood what was in play. Is he good? He's fine, Lucas said flatly. He stays fine. Whatever you're going to say, that doesn't change. Devlin nodded. He looked back at Lucas. You know I wouldn't be here if it weren't serious. I know you believe that. Sokolov's people have been active in the Eastern Corridor again. There's chatter. He paused. Your name came up. The words landed with a particular weight, not panic, nothing that registered on Lucas's face, but a shift in the quality of his stillness. Elena, who had been crossing the lobby toward the elevator bank, saw it from 15 feet away and stopped. She didn't understand what she was watching, but she understood that something was happening, and she understood, from 30-odd yards of observation over the past weeks, that whatever was happening, it was happening in the space between Lucas's surface and whatever he kept below it. Tell me, Lucas said quietly. Devlin gave it to him in rapid, compressed shorthand. The way men in their former world communicated, stripping everything to data. Lucas absorbed it without interrupting. Ethan, drawn by some instinct of his own, had turned from the screen and came back to take his father's hand again. Lucas held it. What's he want? Lucas said when Devlin had finished. To know where you are. He already knows. He wants to know what you're carrying. A silence. I don't carry anything anymore. You carry everything, Devlin said, and it wasn't an accusation. You know that. You've always known that. The question is what they think they can use. Lucas looked at his son. Ethan was watching a group of office workers near the door, already bored with adult conversation, already somewhere else entirely in his mind. I'm out, Lucas said. I've been out. I left with nothing that can come back on anyone. I know that. Then tell them I know that. Lucas, I have a son. His voice didn't change pitch or volume. It was exactly what it always was, controlled even, precise. But something in it had hardened to a quality beyond firmness. Everything I do, every single thing, is structured around keeping him safe and keeping his life ordinary. That is the only mission I have. That is the only mission that exists. Whatever is happening out there, whatever Sokolov's people are doing, whoever's looking, whatever they think they know, it cannot touch this. He glanced down at Ethan, then back at Devlin. I need you to understand that I am not asking for help. I am telling you where the line is. Devlin held his gaze. He was quiet for a moment. Understood, he said finally. Good. Watch yourself, Devlin said, and then, in a quieter register, the kid looks like you. Lucas said nothing. Devlin adjusted his jacket, nodded once, and walked back through the revolving door into the October evening. Lucas stood very still for a moment. Ethan swung their joined hands. Dad, Ethan said, who was that man? An old friend, Lucas said. He seemed serious. He's a serious person. He had tired eyes, Ethan said, with the frank diagnostic accuracy of children who hadn't yet learned to look away from what they saw. Yeah, Lucas said softly. He does. Ethan seemed to accept this. Our taxi's going to be here soon. Yeah, buddy. Lucas looked up, and across the lobby his eyes found Elena, who had gone still in the way of someone trying to decide whether to move. His gaze held hers for a moment, not asking for anything, not explaining, just present, just the quiet acknowledgement that she had been there. She put a hand briefly to her shoulder, a small, instinctive gesture, and then let it fall. It was enough. Dusk, later, much later, after Ethan was asleep with one arm flung over his head and the apartment was quiet and the city made its low, persistent sound outside the window, Lucas sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water he hadn't touched, and looked at nothing in particular. The fear was there. It was always there. He'd made his peace with the fact that it would never fully leave, that the life he'd built with Ethan was built on ground that had once been a battlefield, and that some of that ground would always be unstable. He'd learned to function in the presence of the fear rather than pretending it didn't exist. What was different tonight was something else. For the first time in a long time, the thing he was most afraid of losing was bigger. He looked around the apartment, the small drawing Ethan had taped to the refrigerator, the yellow crayon scrawl of a tall stick figure and a short stick figure, and between them, carefully rendered, a glass tower with a woman at the top, her hair done in 5 loops that he guessed were meant to be waves. The glass lady. Lucas looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he picked up the glass of water, drank it slowly, and went to check the locks. All 3 of them, then the windows, then the hallway camera he'd installed 3 weeks after moving in. He performed the ritual with the quiet thoroughness he performed everything, and then he stood for a long moment in the doorway of his son's room, listening to the easy, uncomplicated rhythm of a 6-year-old breathing in his sleep, alive, safe, undisturbed. He went to bed. He did not sleep for a very long time. The next morning arrived without ceremony, the way mornings in the city always did. Indifferent to whatever had happened the night before, unwilling to acknowledge that any particular night had been harder than the others. The sky over the Helios district was the pale gray of old pewter, the kind of overcast that didn't promise rain so much as simply withheld light, and by 7:15 the lobby of Helios Tower had resumed its ordinary rhythm as though a drone had never come down, as though a man named Devlin had never walked through the revolving door with tired eyes, and a name that Lucas had been trying to leave in the past. Lucas pushed his maintenance cart through the lobby and did what he always did. He watched everything, let none of it show, and went to work. But something had shifted, and he knew it. The shift wasn't in the world around him. It was in the calculus he performed, constantly and automatically, in the back of his mind. The calculation that balanced threat against stability, exposure against security, the life he needed Ethan to have against the life that kept trying to follow him into it. For 14 months, the equation had been relatively clean. He'd built his disappearance carefully, methodically. The new name that was technically his mother's maiden name, so it wasn't entirely a lie, the modest job that put him below the line of anyone's serious interest, the apartment with the 3 locks, and the hallway camera, and the emergency bag in the hall closet that Ethan thought was full of camping gear, and that Lucas hoped to never need. Devlin's appearance hadn't destroyed any of that, but it had reminded Lucas that the equation was never fully clean, that somewhere, on a board he couldn't see, his name was still written. He changed a light fixture on the 3rd floor. He fixed a door hinge on the 7th. He did not think about Elena Cross, and he did so with the deliberate, practiced effort of a man who is absolutely thinking about her. The encounter in the lobby the previous evening had happened in front of her. He had made sure she hadn't been close enough to hear the words, but she was perceptive enough that words might have been secondary. She had seen the shift in his bearing. She had seen Devlin. She had seen Lucas's hand tighten around Ethan's and then, carefully and deliberately, loosen. She hadn't asked him about it. He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he did what he always did with things he wasn't sure about. He filed it, he kept moving, and he waited to understand it better. He didn't have to wait long. She found him at 9:30 on the rooftop, which was not a Tuesday or Thursday, which meant she had gone there specifically to find him. "I moved your Thursday task to today," she said, coming through the rooftop door with the particular briskness of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it. "In the system, maintenance scheduling, so you're officially supposed to be up here." He looked at her. "So it doesn't look irregular," she said. "I wasn't worried about looking irregular." "I know you weren't." She came to stand beside him, looking out at the flat gray sky. "I was." He absorbed that. She had moved his schedule to protect his cover, not for her own benefit, but for his, preemptively, before he'd even thought to manage it. It was a small thing. It was also, he knew, a precise thing, and precision from Elena Cross was never accidental. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know I don't have to," she said. "I wanted to." He looked at the city. A flock of pigeons made a wide arc over the street below and disappeared behind a building across the way. "The man last night," he said. "You don't have to explain him." "I'm aware. I'm choosing to say something anyway." He paused. He was choosing his words with a care that was almost painful. Not because he was being strategic, but because he genuinely was not sure how to talk about this to a person whose opinion mattered to him in a way he hadn't planned on. He's someone from a previous part of my life, a unit I served with. He came to deliver information, not a request. But the information worried you. It wasn't a question. He didn't treat it like one. There are people from that time, he said carefully, who would benefit from knowing certain things about certain operations. I left that world without taking anything with me that could be useful to anyone. But people who traffic in information don't always distinguish between what you actually carry and what they believe you might carry. Elena was quiet for a moment. Is Ethan safe? He looked at her then, and something in him reoriented with a speed that surprised him. The fact that it was the first thing she asked, not, "Are you safe?" Not, "What does this mean for you?" but the boy's name, directly. "Yes," he said. "He's safe. I don't believe this rises to a direct threat. It's surveillance and assessment. They want to know what I know. They want to understand my status. As long as I remain what I am." He gestured, quietly, at the maintenance cart, the rooftop, the ordinary architecture of his life. "They have no reason to escalate. And if that changes, then I have contingencies." "The kind of contingencies that involve the bag in your hall closet?" she said. He went very still. She met his look without flinching. "I walked you and Ethan to your door 3 weeks ago after the building holiday thing. You left the door open while you got him settled. I saw it in the closet." He said nothing for a long moment. "You have a good eye." "I told you," she said. "I've spent 4 years reading rooms." He looked at the city. "It's a precaution," he said. "I hope to never use it." "I know." She put her hands in the pockets of her coat. "I'm not asking you to justify it. I just wanted you to know that I've seen it, and I'm not alarmed by it, and I'm still standing here." Lucas turned to look at her. The light was flat and gray, and it made her look very direct. No softening from the usual afternoon gold, just the clear, honest contour of a face that was not performing anything. "Why are you telling me that?" he asked. "Because," she said, "I think you spend a significant amount of energy anticipating the moment when the things you are will cause the people around you to leave. And I wanted to interrupt that." The silence between them was the kind that meant something. "You're very perceptive," he said finally. "I'm often right," she agreed in a tone that was just dry enough to be kind. "You told me so yourself." Despite everything, the gray sky, the weight of Devlin's visit, the low-grade vigilance he was running at all times, the corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was in the same family. "I should get back to work," he said. "You should," she agreed. She turned toward the door, then stopped. She did not turn back around. "Lucas?" "Yeah." "Thank you for telling me what you told me." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for asking the right question first." She went inside, told it. He stood alone on the rooftop for another minute, looking at the city, feeling the October air on his face, and thinking about the precise way in which Elena Cross occupied space, how she took up exactly as much of it as she needed and not a single inch more, how she moved through a room like someone who understood that presence was a choice. Then he picked up his maintenance kit and went back to work. The weeks that followed had a texture that Lucas had not felt in years. He wasn't sure at first what to call it. It took him a while to recognize it as something close to normalcy, not the performed normalcy he'd been constructing for 14 months, the careful architecture of an ordinary life built to look like it had always been that way, but something more genuine, something that felt inhabited rather than constructed. Ethan noticed. Ethan noticed everything, in the way that children notice the things adults learn to screen out. He began asking, with increasing frequency and a 6-year-old's complete lack of self-consciousness, when they were going to see the glass lady again. Lucas deflected with the smooth, gentle efficiency of a parent who'd had a lot of practice redirecting inconvenient questions towards snacks or interesting observations about passing trucks. But he didn't dismiss it. There were moments that accumulated, small and specific, the kind that didn't individually announce themselves as significant, but that, taken together, built something he couldn't ignore. The Tuesday she arrived on the rooftop with a thermos of proper coffee, not the ground floor stuff, but actual good coffee, the kind from the third-floor cafe that cost more than she would have needed to spend, and didn't make anything of it, The Thursday she mentioned in passing that she'd seen a book on Korean War-era special operations in a shop window and had thought of him, and then caught herself and said carefully that she hoped that wasn't inappropriate. He told her it wasn't. He didn't tell her he'd thought of her that morning when Ethan had said something peculiarly perceptive about clouds. The Wednesday afternoon, he was working in the building's lower parking structure when he heard a car alarm failing to turn off and looked up to find Elena standing next to a silver sedan with her key fob held at arm's length and a look of pure, undisguised bafflement on her face. The CEO of Helios Innovations, defeated by a parking lot. He had walked over, taken the fob without a word, and performed a 3-button sequence that silenced the alarm immediately. She had stared at him with an expression he'd never seen from her before. "How did you know to do that?" she demanded. "The battery in the fob is running low, throwing off the signal. It happens. I've owned this car for 2 years. It happens more when it gets cold." "I run a technology company," she said, in a tone that suggested she found this personally offensive. "The car doesn't know that." She had looked at him for a moment, and he would remember this with a specific clarity that surprised him. She had laughed. Not the CEO laugh, not the one he'd heard her deploy in the lobby or at corporate events, but the real one, the one that started somewhere below the surface and came up without asking permission. It was brief and involuntary and wholly genuine, and it changed the architecture of her face completely. He was, he realized, in significant trouble. He carried that realization quietly for several days, the way he carried most things, held close, examined carefully, not acted upon without understanding. He had not allowed himself to need something for a long time. Not since Ethan, and Ethan was different, because Ethan had arrived with such force and completeness that there was no choosing involved. The boy had simply installed himself at the center of Lucas's life with the total authority of someone who knew exactly where he belonged. This was different. This was a choice, or the territory adjacent to a choice, and Lucas approached it with the same methodical wariness he approached everything that mattered. He asked himself the right questions. Not whether he felt something, that much was established, but whether it was safe, whether it was fair. Whether Elena Cross, who ran a 62-floor glass tower and had a calendar that booked out 4 months in advance, and a way of looking at a room that made every person in it feel both seen and slightly outmatched, had any business being involved with a man who checked his locks 3 times before bed and kept a bag in his closet, and had, somewhere in the world, enemies who still knew his name. He asked himself whether it was honest. That was the question that stayed with him longest, because Lucas Hale had been, in his previous life, a great many things that were not honest. He had inhabited false identities with such completeness that he sometimes wondered which Lucas was the constructed one. He had told necessary lies to people who trusted him and had lived with the particular weight that left behind. He had made peace with the person he'd been. Mostly. The work had been necessary. The causes had been ones he believed in. The damage had been, on the moral balance sheet he maintained privately, worth it. But he had promised himself, the night Ethan was born, and the world had reorganized itself around that fact, that the life he built afterward would be honest. Not simple. He was not naive enough to think simple was available to him, but honest, genuine, real. The question was whether what he was allowing himself to feel for Elena was compatible with that promise. He thought about it for a week. Then he stopped thinking about it, because the thinking was running in circles, and Lucas had always been better at action than analysis. What he did instead was tell her a little more. Not the classified parts, not the missions, not the specific work, not the details that had been sealed in multiple jurisdictions, but the edges, the shape of the thing. He told her, in increments, across several rooftop conversations, and one evening, when they had both ended up working late and found themselves in the building cafe at 8:30 with lukewarm sandwiches and nobody else around, about what it had felt like to do that work. The isolation of it, the years of operating in a world that existed below the surface of the world everyone else lived in, where the rules were different and the costs were different, and the friendships, when they formed at a depth and intensity that had no equivalent in ordinary life. He told her about the moment he decided to leave. Not the mechanics of it, not the specific incident that had made it clear the balance had shifted, but the feeling of it. Sitting in a safe house in an unnamed city, looking at a photograph he kept in his chest pocket, and understanding with sudden and absolute certainty that the thing in the photograph was more real than anything else he'd been doing, and that he was going to go toward it, regardless of what it cost. The photograph was of the ultrasound. Ethan, 10 weeks old, barely more than a shape, already entirely himself. Elena had listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Where is Ethan's mother?" she asked, and her voice was careful. The question of someone who had been waiting to understand something and had found the right moment. Lucas looked at his coffee cup. "She died. Before he was born, 7 months in. An accident." He said it with the economy of a man who had learned to carry that particular grief without letting it become a room he lived in. "I found out she was pregnant and I came home. I got there in time to hold her and then she was gone. And then 6 weeks later, Ethan arrived." He paused. He came into the world already knowing how to be the most important thing in it. The cafe hummed around them. Outside, the city continued. "I'm sorry," Elena said. It was simple and unadorned, and she did not try to add anything to it, which was exactly right. "It was a long time ago," he said. "I don't mean that in the way people say it when they haven't accepted something. I mean it in the way that the pain has found its right size." She nodded slowly. "And the work? After? You went back?" "Once, for 3 months, to settle certain things, and then I was done." His voice was flat and certain. "There was a child who needed a father, and I was the only one available for that job." Elena looked at him, not with pity, which he would not have wanted, but with the careful, concentrated attention she gave to things that mattered. "You chose it without hesitation," she said, "leaving all of that." "I chose him without hesitation," he said. "The leaving was just the mechanism." She was quiet for a moment, then she said very quietly, "He's lucky. I'm the lucky one." And he said it without self-consciousness, without performance, the way he said the things that were simply true. The cafe hummed. Their sandwiches sat mostly uneaten. The city outside the window ran its continuous, indifferent life. "Tell me something about yourself," Lucas said. The shift was deliberate. He had been speaking for a long time, more than he usually spoke, more than he'd spoken to anyone outside of Ethan's daycare pickup conversations in over a year, and the unfamiliarity of it made him want equilibrium. "Something that isn't on your company profile." She considered this. "I make very bad decisions when it comes to houseplants," she said. "I buy them with great optimism, and they die with great regularity. I currently have 4 on my office windowsill that are in various stages of distress." "That's because you overwater them." She stared at him. "I barely water them at all." "People who don't grow up with gardens always assume plants die from too little water. Usually it's too much." He paused. "What kind?" "2 are succulents. I thought those were supposed to be impossible to kill." "Even succulents will die if the pot doesn't drain." He looked at her. "I'll look at them." "When I'm on the 44th floor." She raised an eyebrow. "You're going to prescribe medical care for my houseplants." "Preventive care," he said. "It's too late for medical." She smiled, and it was the real one, and Lucas told himself, carefully and without particular success, that this was a normal thing to notice. "Tell me something else," he said. She thought. "I didn't want this job," she said. The lightness left her voice, replaced with something honest. "When the board offered it to me, I was 31, and I'd been at the company 4 years, and I thought they were making a mistake. I said yes anyway, because I thought—" She paused. "I thought if I said no because I was afraid, then fear would be the thing running my life." He looked at her. "You were afraid of failing." "I was afraid of being seen to fail," she said, "which is different and worse, because it means the fear is about other people's assessment rather than the actual outcome. I've spent 4 years dismantling that particular reflex." A beat. "I'm better at it than I was." "What changed it?" "Failing," she said simply, "doing it in front of people and watching the building not fall down." She tilted her head. "You know that thing. The anticipation of the catastrophe is almost always worse than the catastrophe itself?" "I know that thing." You probably know it better than most." "Different contexts," he said. "But the principle holds." She looked at him. He looked at her. It was one of those moments that seemed to exist slightly outside the normal compression of time, expanded, attentive, more real than its surroundings. "Lucas," she said. "Yeah," She seemed to decide something. I want to say something, and I want you to let me finish before you react. He nodded. I'm aware of the complications involved in whatever this is. She gestured between them, a small, precise gesture. I'm not naive about the differences in our positions, in what we carry, in what the world looks like for each of us. I run a company. You have a past that people are still interested in. I understand there are reasons to be cautious, and there are reasons to keep things exactly as they are. She paused. And I want you to know that I'm not asking you for anything you're not able to give. I'm not asking you to change the equation. I'm just telling you that when I'm on this rooftop, or in this cafe, or on that marble lobby floor watching you carry a child to safety, those are the moments I feel most like myself. She stopped. That probably doesn't make sense. It makes complete sense, he said. She looked at him. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him doing the thing he did, the calculation, the careful processing. She had learned to wait for it. She had learned that what came out the other side was usually worth the wait. I haven't let myself want something for a long time, he said. He turned his coffee cup once in his hands. Every choice I've made since Ethan arrived has been structured around protecting a life for him that has enough room in it, a life with space, no shadows, no residue from the things I was. He stopped. And I think I've been treating that as though it were incompatible with having anything else, with wanting anything for myself. She was very still. I'm not sure that's true, he said. I think I've been using the carefulness as a way to not risk anything, which is, he paused, which is its own kind of running away. Elena said nothing. She understood that this was not a speech that needed response. It was a man thinking out loud for perhaps the first time in a very long time, and the most useful thing she could offer it was room. I'm not going to make you any promises I don't know how to keep, he said. I'm not going to tell you that the past is behind me in any clean, final way, because I've stopped believing that's how it works. But I can tell you, he looked at her directly, with the full quality of attention that she now understood was one of the rarest things he gave to anyone. I can tell you that this, he gestured in the same small way she had gestured. This is real. For me, whatever it is. The cafe was empty. The city glittered outside. Okay, Elena said. Okay? Okay. There was something in her voice that was very close to relief. Not the relief of getting what you wanted, but the relief of not having to carry uncertainty alone anymore. That's enough. He looked at her for a moment. You're not going to say more than that? Lucas, she said, you just opened a door that's been sealed for years. I'm not going to run through it at full speed. She stood, picking up the remnants of their late-night cafe dinner. I'll wait for you to decide what pace works. He stood as well, gathering his side of the debris. They moved toward the door together, and he held it for her without thinking about it, and she walked through and waited for him on the other side without thinking about that either. Two people observing the ordinary courtesies of people who are something to each other without having fully named it. In the elevator, going up, she said, the succulents. I'll look at them Thursday. They may already be beyond saving. We'll see. The elevator chimed and the doors opened and she stepped out on 44, and he continued up to the maintenance floor, and neither of them said goodbye, which felt, in its own way, like a beginning. The call came on a Friday night. Lucas was making dinner, pasta, Ethan's Friday request, the same every week, with the same precise specifications about the sauce not touching the other sauce. When his phone buzzed on the counter with a number he recognized and had hoped not to see again so soon. He stood for a moment with the wooden spoon in his hand, listening to Ethan narrate, from the living room floor, the ongoing saga of a toy truck's journey through an elaborate obstacle course made from couch cushions. Then he put the spoon down and answered, Devlin, you have 60 seconds to hear this, and then I won't contact you again unless you initiate. Devlin's voice was clipped and flat. Mission mode, no warmth. Sokolov sent 2 people to the city. We have identification on one. The other is unknown. They are in assessment posture only. No active operation. But they know your approximate location. Not building specific. Not yet. Lucas processed this in the same compressed way he processed everything tactical. Quickly, completely, without panic. Timeline? Unknown. Assessment phase usually runs 2 to 3 weeks before they escalate to the next stage. What's the next stage? Depends on what they think you have. I have nothing. Then they'll determine that and withdraw. A pause. Or they'll decide you're a loose end and act accordingly. What does withdrawing look like versus the other thing? Usually you stop seeing surveillance signs. If they're still there after 3 weeks, you've been categorized differently. And you're telling me this because I owe you. Devlin said it simply, without elaboration or apology. Twice, by my count. And because the kid is 6 years old, and he didn't sign up for any of this. Lucas was silent for a moment. In the living room, the truck apparently encountered a significant obstacle. Ethan provided sound effects. I'm not coming back in, Lucas said. I want that to be clear. I'm not asking you to come back in. I'm giving you information. What do you want in return? Nothing. Another pause. Maybe don't let Ethan forget me. He seemed like a good kid. He is a good kid. Lucas's voice was quiet. I'll handle this. I know you will. The call ended. Lucas stood for a moment in his kitchen with the phone in his hand and the pasta water boiling and the sound of his son's game filling the apartment with its careless, ordinary music. Then he put the phone face down on the counter, picked up the spoon, and stirred the sauce. Dad, Ethan called. The bridge fell down, but I saved the truck. Good recovery, Lucas called back. The bridge is beyond saving, though. Sometimes that happens. He turned the heat down. Come wash your hands, buddy. 3 minutes. A theatrical groan, the shuffle of small feet. Lucas stood at the stove and watched the sauce and thought, with a precision that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with the years of training that never fully left a person, about what 3 weeks looked like and what assets he had available and what the contingency sequence would be, and whether the apartment had enough angles covered, and whether the hallway camera was positioned correctly. He also thought about Elena. He thought about what she had said in the cafe. Those are the moments I feel most like myself. And he thought about the door she had told him he'd opened, and about the patience she'd offered, and about the fact that somewhere between the lobby and the rooftop and the parking garage and the late-night sandwiches, she had become a part of the equation too. She was going to need to know. Not the operational details, not names, not specifics, nothing that put her at risk by proximity to information, but the shape of it. The reality that the next 3 weeks were going to require a different level of vigilance, and that his world had a temperature that she deserved to understand before she got closer to it. He thought about how to tell her. He thought about whether telling her would be the thing that finally, reasonably, correctly sent her in the other direction. He thought about Ethan's drawing on the refrigerator, the stick figures and the glass tower, and the 5-loop waves of the glass lady's hair. He turned off the burner. Ethan, he said, hands. Already washing, came the indignant response from the bathroom. I know the rules. I know you know the rules. I'm reminding you anyway. That's what you say when you don't trust the rules are being followed. Lucas looked at the ceiling with an expression that was several things at once. Exasperation, love, the particular overwhelmed quality that his son could produce in him with a single, accurately aimed observation. Fair point, he said. Dinner's ready in 2. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway with aggressively clean hands extended for inspection, water still dripping from the wrists. Lucas checked them with the gravity the ritual deserved, nodded his approval, and began serving the pasta. Sauce, not touching other sauce. The architecture of a 6-year-old's dinner requirements maintained with full respect. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. Dad, Ethan said, with his fork already investigating the pasta, are you worried about something? Lucas looked at his son. Those eyes, his mother's eyes, dark and direct, the kind that didn't look at the surface of things but through them. Why do you ask? You got quiet in a different way than normal quiet. Ethan twirled the fork. Normal quiet is thinking quiet. This is worried quiet. Lucas picked up his own fork. You're a perceptive kid, he said. I know. No self-consciousness whatsoever. Then, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone delivering a reasonable piece of information, it's okay to be worried. Ms. Okafor says worried means you care about something. Ms. Okafor's right. What do you care about? Lucas looked at his son, at the red jacket still on because Ethan had forgotten to take it off, at the turtle backpack slumped against the table leg, at the face that was the most uncomplicated source of clarity in his life. "You," he said simply, "and that things stay good." Ethan nodded, accepting this with complete satisfaction, and went back to the pasta. And Lucas Hale, former operative, single father, man of 3 locks and a hall closet full of contingencies, watched his son eat dinner in a small kitchen in a city full of complications, and held on to the fact that right now, in this specific moment, everything that mattered was exactly where it should be. That would have to be enough. For tonight, it was. The surveillance signs were subtle, and Lucas was almost certain he was the only person in the building who would have noticed them. The first was a white panel van that appeared on Meridian Avenue on Monday morning, parked in the loading zone across from Helios Tower with a magnetic decal on its side advertising a plumbing company that Lucas spent 40 seconds researching on his phone during his morning break and could not locate in any city directory. By Tuesday, it had moved half a block south. By Wednesday, it was gone, which was itself a sign. Amateurs stayed in one place. Professionals rotated. The second was a man he made twice in 3 days, once near the coffee cart outside the lobby, once in the parking structure on level 2, carrying a phone at an angle that suggested he was photographing something in his peripheral vision rather than looking at the screen. Medium height, forgettable face, the particular quality of stillness in a crowd that only people trained to be invisible acquired. He was good. Lucas was better, because Lucas had spent years being trained by people who had forgotten more about surveillance than this man likely knew. He didn't react. He didn't change his patterns. He went to work. He changed light fixtures and fixed door hinges and swept marble floors. He picked Ethan up from school at 3:15 every day and made dinner and checked the locks and reviewed the hallway camera footage with the door closed after Ethan was asleep. He did all of this and he waited, because waiting was sometimes the most tactically sound response available, and because the one thing he would not do was let fear drive him into an action that disrupted the life he had built for his son. But he needed to tell Elena. The difficulty was the how of it. Not because he doubted the decision. He'd made the decision during the pasta dinner on Friday, and Lucas did not unmake decisions, but because telling Elena meant giving her information she hadn't asked for, about a situation she hadn't chosen to be adjacent to, and it meant watching her face when she understood the full weight of what proximity to him actually involved. He had imagined that face many times in the past few days. He was not sure what expression it would wear. He found out on Thursday afternoon. He came through the rooftop door at 1:15 to find her already there, not with coffee this time, but standing at the east railing with her arms folded and her back to the door, looking out at the city with a posture that suggested she had been standing there long enough to have moved past restlessness into something more settled. She turned when she heard him. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. "You've been different this week," she said. He set his maintenance kit down. "I know. Not in a visible way. I don't think anyone else would see it." She turned back to the railing. "You're doing the same things. You're in the same places at the same times. But the quality of your attention has changed. You're running hotter." He came to stand beside her. Below them, the city moved in its usual indifference. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "I know." Her voice was even. "I've been waiting for you to decide to." He told her. He kept it clean and direct. No excess, no dramatization, no softening of the relevant facts. 2 individuals in assessment posture, origin point the same network Devlin had warned him about. Probable timeline of 2 to 3 weeks before they either withdrew or escalated. His assessment of the current risk level as manageable but not ignorable. The contingencies he had in place. He told her all of it in the same measured tone he used for everything else, watching her face as he did. She listened without interrupting. She was very still in the way that she was still when she was absorbing something completely, not shut down but turned fully inward, processing. When he finished, the silence ran for about 10 seconds. "Ethan," she said, "I have a plan if it escalates. He would be moved first, to people I trust, before anything else." He paused. "I would not let anything reach him." "I know you wouldn't." She said it without qualifier, without the slight upward inflection that would have made it a question disguised as a statement. "What do you need from me?" He looked at her. He had prepared himself for several possible responses. Concern, withdrawal, the reasonable and measured decision to step back from whatever this was until the situation clarified itself. He had not precisely prepared himself for this. Nothing operationally, he said. I don't want you involved in that structure. The less you know about specifics, the safer you are. Information is leverage, and I won't give anyone leverage through you. Okay, she nodded slowly. Then what are you telling me for? Because you deserve to understand what's in the room, he said. Because this, he gestured between them, the same small gesture they'd both used that had come to belong to this specific shorthand, means something to me, and I don't want to be someone who keeps the important things from you in the name of protecting you. That's not protection. That's just control dressed up as care. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That's one of the most honest things anyone has ever said to me. I've been trying, he said. She turned to face him fully. The October sky was moving behind her, clouds pulling south, and the light was that particular late afternoon gold that turned everything slightly more significant than it actually was. Or perhaps, he thought, it was accurately representing how significant this actually was. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I want that to be equally clear. I'm not going to pretend I'm not processing some of this in real time. A brief, honest acknowledgement, her particular gift for naming things without dramatizing them. But I'm not going anywhere. I've been around difficult situations before. I've managed boardrooms full of people trying to destroy me professionally. I understand that things are complicated. This is a different kind of complicated. I know. Her eyes were steady. Tell me what you need me to do or not do, and I'll do it. Don't disappear on me and call it keeping me safe. That's the only thing I'm asking. That's a reasonable ask. I'm often reasonable, she said, and there was enough dry warmth in it to soften the weight of the preceding minutes. He looked at her for a long moment. The wall, the one he'd been building and maintaining and reinforcing for years, the one that had kept him functional and private and protected, had by this point so many openings in it that calling it a wall seemed generous. It was more like the suggestion of a wall, the memory of one. Okay, he said. Okay, she agreed. They stood at the railing together for a while, not touching, looking out over the city. It was, Lucas thought, one of the more honest silences he had ever shared with another person. Not the silence of people who had run out of things to say, but the silence of people who had said the important things and now simply existed in the same space, which was its own kind of statement. After a while, he picked up his maintenance kit. The succulents, he said. I moved them to a pot with drainage, she said, per instructions. How do they look? One of them appears to be reconsidering its decision to die. Progress, he said. She almost smiled. Progress, she agreed. He went to work. She stayed at the railing for a few minutes longer, looking out at the city, and he was aware of her presence with a precision that had nothing to do with surveillance and everything to do with something considerably more complex and considerably less manageable. The week that followed had a dual texture. On the surface, the ordinary rhythms of the building, the maintenance rounds, the rooftop conversations, Ethan's school pickups and pasta Fridays, and the ongoing dramatic saga of the toy truck and its expanding infrastructure. Beneath that surface, Lucas ran a constant, quiet operational layer, noting the van's new position 2 blocks east, clocking the second surveillance contact who was better than the first, tracking the pattern of their movements against a mental map he was constructing with the same care he'd once used to plan extraction routes. They were still in assessment phase. He was certain of that. The signs were consistent with information gathering, not with the preparatory moves of an active operation. But the fact of their continued presence after 10 days meant they had not yet made the determination that he had nothing of value, which meant they were either thorough or uncertain or both. He ran his contingencies again every night. He updated them where the situations demanded. He identified 2 additional extraction vectors from the apartment that he hadn't fully worked through before, and he walked both routes on a Sunday afternoon with Ethan in the stroller he hadn't actually used in 2 years but kept, because it provided cover for route reconnaissance with a child in tow. Dad, Ethan said from the stroller, with the tone of someone who had clocked that this particular walk had no identifiable destination, where are we going? Exploring, Lucas said. We've walked this street before. Explorers sometimes return to known territory. Ethan considered this with the seriousness he brought to logical problems. That's called surveying, he said. Ms. Okafor told us about surveying. Ms. Okafor is correct. Lucas turned the stroller at the corner, noting sightlines. You're very well educated. I know. A beat. Dad, can we get a hot dog? Yes. From the cart on Meridian, not the one near school. The one near school puts too much mustard. Noted. He adjusted his assessment of the building on the left corner as they passed. You have strong opinions about condiments for a 6-year-old. I have strong opinions about everything, Ethan said, with absolute serenity. Lucas looked down at his son. The turtle backpack, the sneakers, the small face turned toward the city with the expression of someone entirely at home in it, and felt the familiar compound thing, the love that didn't have adequate language, the weight of responsibility, the fear, and underneath all of it, like a foundation stone, the absolute certainty that this was the only mission that had ever deserved his full commitment. They got hot dogs on Meridian. Ethan's had the correct amount of mustard. It was Ethan who broke the surface first, which was perhaps fitting. It happened on a Thursday evening, 14 days after Devlin's call, in the lobby of Helios Tower. Lucas had brought Ethan to the building after school because his usual pickup arrangement had fallen through. His neighbor, Mrs. Park, who watched Ethan on late days, had a medical appointment. The building's HR department had a policy allowing staff to bring children to common areas in non-operational circumstances, and Lucas had availed himself of it twice before without incident. Ethan, in the lobby, was a focused and purposeful personality. He had identified the security desk as the most interesting feature. Specifically, the bank of monitors showing feeds from every camera in the building. He had entered into what appeared to be a serious professional consultation with the head of security, a large patient man named Gerald who had discovered that Ethan had thoughtful questions about camera angles and had decided to answer them all. Lucas was replacing a scuff guard on the main entrance door, approximately 20 feet away, when Elena came through the lobby from the elevator bank and stopped. She saw Ethan first. Lucas watched her face from across the room. The particular shift that happened in it, a softness arriving that was different from the softness he usually saw, something quieter and more fundamental. She walked over to the security desk. Gerald, registering her approach, straightened slightly in the way everyone in the building straightened when Elena Cross arrived. Ethan, who had not yet developed the reflex of straightening for authority figures, continued studying the monitor bank. Gerald, Elena said, how's the family? All good, Ms. Cross. This young man has been asking some very sharp questions about our coverage gaps. Elena looked at Ethan. Coverage gaps? Ethan looked up. He was Lucas noted from his position by the door, not shy. Ethan was essentially never shy. He regarded Elena with the frank, direct appraisal of a child who saw the world in the unfiltered way that most adults spent years learning to filter. There's a blind spot, Ethan said. He pointed at one of the monitors. Right there, between camera 4 and camera 7. If someone walked along the east wall in that section, they wouldn't show up on either. Elena looked at the monitor. She was quiet for a moment. You're right, she said. That's accurate. Ethan nodded. My dad says that coverage gaps are important to know about. A pause. Elena's expression did something careful. Your dad sounds like he knows about security. He knows about a lot of things, Ethan said, with the easy authority of someone stating an established fact. He knows about plants and cars and first aid and how to make pasta 17 different ways and how to tell what the weather is going to do without checking a phone. He paused. He also knows about cameras and locks. Another pause, more reflective. He checks the locks a lot. Does he? Elena said. 3 times usually, but he doesn't think I know that. Ethan looked at her. You're the glass lady. Elena blinked. Then very quietly she smiled. That's what you call me? It's because of the building. He studied her with a scientist's lack of self-consciousness. Your hair is different than I drew it. You drew my hair. In the picture, after the drone. He tilted his head. I drew it with loops, but it's more like waves, actually. I'll take waves, she said. Lucas, 20 feet away, had stopped working on the door. He was watching this exchange with an expression that someone who knew him well would have identified as the expression of a man encountering something he hadn't known he was missing until this precise moment. Elena crouched down to Ethan's level, not in the slightly performative way adults sometimes crouch to be at a child's height, but naturally, The way someone does when they genuinely want to be in the same space as the person they're talking to. "Your name is Ethan," she said. "Yes, I'm 6. I'll be 7 in December. December is a good month." "It is," he agreed. "What's your name?" "Elena." He considered this. "That's a good name." Then, with the casual directness that was apparently his default mode, "Are you friends with my dad?" Elena looked up briefly, met Lucas's eyes across the lobby. He was very still, watching, and then looked back at Ethan. "I am," she said. "We have coffee sometimes." "On the roof," Ethan said. Elena paused. "He told you that?" "No, but he comes back from the roof different." Ethan's expression was entirely matter-of-fact, like he's been someplace he likes. The lobby moved around them. Gerald was looking with great interest at a point somewhere above their heads. Lucas had stopped breathing for a moment. "That's—" Elena paused. "That's very observant of you." "I know," Ethan said. Then, with the simplicity of someone for whom the logical next step was obvious, "You should come to dinner sometime. Dad makes pasta 17 ways. He could make one you like." Elena looked up at Lucas again. He was across the lobby, scuff guard forgotten in his hand, and his face held an expression she had never seen on it before. Not the careful neutrality, not the almost smile, not the controlled stillness. Something open, something that looked like the face a man makes when he's blindsided by something that is also, in the same moment, exactly right. "I'll ask him about that," she said to Ethan. "He'll probably say yes," Ethan told her, with the confidence of someone who knew how negotiations in his household tended to resolve. Lucas walked Elena to the elevator at 5:45 while Ethan finished his security consultation with Gerald. They stood in the elevator alcove for a moment without speaking. 17 ways, Elena said. Approximately. He's extraordinary. Yes. No qualification, no false modesty. He is. She looked at him. There was something different in the air between them since the lobby exchange. Something that had been implicit and was becoming explicit. Something that had been building with the patient accumulation of small moments and was beginning to consolidate into a shape you could name. He sees everything, Lucas said. He was quiet for a moment. His mother was the same way. It's the thing he has most directly from her. He said it without the weight that the subject sometimes carried, evenly, as a fact about Ethan rather than a wound about himself. He's already protecting you, Elena said softly. The comment about the locks. He knows, and he's not burdened by it. He just includes it as part of who you are. Lucas absorbed this. It was, he realized, exactly right, and the fact that she'd seen it, had looked at a 30-second interaction with a 6-year-old and found the thing that Lucas carried about his son in his chest like a stone he'd never fully been able to set down, did something significant to the last organized section of his defenses. The dinner invitation, he said. I told him I'd ask you. He already knows I'll say yes. He has good intelligence, she said. A silence. Sunday, he said, if that works. She looked at him for a moment, and what was in her expression was real and unguarded, and he held it rather than looking away from it. Sunday works, she said. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. The doors began to close. Elena, he said. She held them open with one hand. Thank you, he said, for how you were with him. She shook her head. You don't thank people for responding to something genuine, she said. And then the doors closed, and she was gone upward through the building, and Lucas stood in the elevator alcove for a moment with the scuff guard still in his hand and something quiet and extraordinary sitting in his chest. Then Ethan appeared at his elbow. She said yes about dinner, Ethan reported. I heard. I think she'll like the pasta with the lemon. He considered. She seems like a lemon person. What does a lemon person look like? Ethan thought about this seriously. Someone who likes things bright, he said, even when they're a little sharp. Lucas looked at his son. There were moments when Ethan's perceptive faculty produced something that so perfectly named a truth that Lucas had to take a moment to simply absorb the fact of it. Yeah, he said quietly. I think you're right. I know, Ethan said, and retrieved his backpack from Gerald's desk, said a professional goodbye to Gerald, and headed for the door with the purposeful stride of someone who had accomplished everything he'd set out to accomplish. Lucas saw the second contact again on Saturday morning. He was at the corner market 2 blocks from the apartment, Ethan in tow with a very specific list of things needed for Sunday dinner, when he clocked the man near the produce section, not the same man as before, which was notable. Rotating contacts meant the operation was better resourced than a simple 2-person assessment team. It also meant they were getting closer to a decision. He moved through the market normally, added nothing to his cart that he wouldn't have added, and departed at the pace he'd arrived. He let Ethan debate the merits of 2 types of pasta for 4 minutes because it was the thing Ethan would have done regardless, and because behaving differently would itself be a signal. On the walk home, Ethan on his left and the market bags on his right, he ran the new calculation. 3 contacts now confirmed. Rotation pattern suggested professional resourcing. Duration of 14 days meant either sustained uncertainty about his status or, and this was the reading he trusted less but couldn't discard, active preparation moving into a later phase ahead of the standard timeline. He needed more information. He made the call he hadn't wanted to make from the apartment landline after Ethan was in bed. Not his cell phone, not anything connected to his name. The landline he'd installed specifically for this kind of contingency because landlines were harder to triangulate in real time. Devlin answered on the second ring. "You're seeing more than 2, Lucas said. A pause. "When?" "Today. Market on Chambers, different face from the parking structure, rotating contacts." Devlin was quiet for a moment that was slightly too long. That escalated faster than projected. "Yeah." Lucas kept his voice level. "What do you know?" "There's a timeline pressure I wasn't read into when we spoke last. Sokolov's operation is moving, something external, a reorganization of assets. They may be trying to close open files before the structure changes." Another pause. "You're an open file." "Define what closing an open file looks like." "Could mean confirming you're inactive and withdrawing. Could mean, I know what else it could mean," Lucas said. "How long do I have before they're ready to act either way?" "A week. Maybe less." Lucas sat with that for a moment. In Ethan's room, he could hear the particular rhythm of a child in deep sleep, the small, unconscious sounds, the occasional shift of blankets. 7 years old in December, a blue favorite color, strong mustard opinions, a gift for naming true things. "Is there a way to accelerate their determination that I'm inactive?" Lucas said. "Possibly. If the right information reached the right person in Sokolov's assessment chain, something that confirmed you have nothing and are nothing to them. Can you do that?" Another pause. "It would require me putting my name on a communication they'd know came from within a former allied network. They'd know I was protecting someone. I know what I'm asking." Silence. Lucas waited. "The kid," Devlin said finally. Not a question, not exactly a statement. "Yes," Lucas said. A long moment. "I'll make a call tomorrow morning," Devlin said. "No promises, but I'll try to put it in front of someone who can move it up the chain." "What do you need from me?" "Stay visible. Keep your patterns exactly as they are. Do not give them anything that reads as preparation. No pattern change, no early exits, nothing. They need to read you as entirely what you appear to be." "I know the protocol," Lucas said. "I know you know it." A pause. "You have a reason to stay visible?" Lucas thought about Sunday dinner, about pasta with lemon, about a woman who moved through a room like presence was a choice and who had asked when she learned about Sokolov's people, about Ethan first. "Yeah," he said. "I have a reason." "Good," Devlin said. "Hold on to it. Those are useful." The call ended. Lucas sat in the kitchen for a moment, then stood, checked the locks 3 times, as was the ritual, reviewed the hallway camera, and went to bed. He slept poorly, but he slept, which was itself a kind of discipline. Ditet. Sunday dinner arrived with the particular anxiety-adjacent energy of first times, or what passed for first times, given that Elena had been in the apartment's orbit for months now without ever having been inside it. She arrived at 6 with a bottle of wine she'd clearly chosen carefully and a small yellow toy truck she'd purchased without announcing she would, and when Ethan opened the door and saw the truck, his face went through 5 expressions in approximately 1 second. "That's a loader," he said. I was told loaders were important, she said. They're the second most important after excavators. He took it with careful reverence. How did you know? Your dad may have mentioned something about wheels. Ethan looked at his father with an expression that was equal parts appreciation and mild accusation. The look of someone discovering their intelligence network had more active nodes than they'd realized. Lucas, in the kitchen doorway with the dish towel over his shoulder, said nothing. He just watched his son and Elena in the small entrance of his apartment, the yellow truck passing between them, and felt something so specific and large that he couldn't have named it with any single word. Dinner was the lemon pasta. Ethan had been correct. She was a lemon person. She ate 2 full servings and praised it with the unguarded sincerity of someone who genuinely hadn't expected it to be that good, which Lucas found disproportionately satisfying. Ethan dominated the dinner conversation with a thoroughness that under other circumstances might have been exhausting, and under these circumstances was the exact right thing, because it filled the space with warmth and reality and the specific ungovernable life of a child who didn't know there was anything to be nervous about. He talked about the loader. He talked about the coverage gap at Gerald's security desk. He explained at considerable length the theoretical framework of his Tuesday mustard preference. He asked Elena whether she had ever seen an excavator in person, and when she said yes, once, on a construction site near her office, he demanded a full account with the intensity of a prosecuting attorney. Elena gave the full account. She did not condescend, did not simplify, did not make the mistake of treating a 6-year-old's fierce curiosity as anything less than what it was, a genuine and formidable intelligence, encountering the world with everything it had. Lucas sat at the head of his small kitchen table and watched the two of them and thought, this is the thing I almost talked myself out of. After dinner, Ethan showed Elena his drawings. Not the old ones, the new ones, the ones he'd been making since the lobby incident, the expanding visual universe of his imagination. Buildings and trucks and people, rendered in crayon with the confident line of someone who drew because he needed to and not because he'd been told it was a good skill to develop. He narrated each one with the same earnest authority he gave to everything. This one is the roof, he said, holding up a drawing of 2 stick figures beside a row of green rectangles. The planters, Lucas recognized. That's you, he said, pointing at the taller figure. He pointed at the other. That's Miss Elena. Elena looked at the drawing for a moment. She said very quietly, you put us both on the roof. That's where you both go, Ethan said, with the pragmatic clarity of someone describing an obvious truth. Then, apparently satisfied with the tour, he gathered his drawings and announced it was time for the loader to begin its inaugural mission and disappeared into the living room. The kitchen was quiet. Elena looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at Elena. The apartment settled around them, the small sounds of a Sunday evening in a city that didn't know and didn't care what was happening inside these particular walls. He put us both on the roof, she said again softly. He notices things, Lucas said. He notices the right things. She paused. So do you. He held her gaze. Everything Devlin had told him was in the room with them. The surveillance, the timeline, the week or less, the open file. And it sat alongside this, alongside the lemon pasta and the yellow loader and 2 stick figures on a rooftop. And he understood, with the absolute clarity that came sometimes in the spaces between fear and action, that the life he had built in these 14 months was not just a protected space for Ethan. It had become, without his fully noticing, a life he wanted. Whatever happens this week, he said carefully, I need you to know. Lucas. Her voice was steady. Let me finish. She waited. I need you to know that the gesture, the same small gesture, is the realest thing I've let myself have in a long time, and I don't have a clean way to offer it to you, and I can't promise the complications resolve neatly, and I understand if that changes your— It doesn't, she said. He stopped. It doesn't change anything, she said. I told you I'm not going anywhere. I meant it when there was less at stake. I mean it more now. She paused. You've been preparing for the moment I decide this is too complicated. I need you to stop preparing for that, because it's not going to happen. He was quiet for a long moment. From the living room came the sounds of the loader's inaugural mission, narrated in a running commentary by Ethan, who apparently felt that important engineering operations deserved live coverage. Okay, Lucas said. Okay, she said back, And it was the same word they'd been giving each other since the first rooftop conversation, the same word that had become, between them, its own kind of promise. Not a declaration, not an arrival, but a direction. A commitment to keep walking the same way. He cleared the dinner plates. She helped without being asked. They worked in his kitchen together with the ease of people who had already established, without discussing it, where things went and how space was shared. It felt, Lucas thought, like something that had always been here, like something he'd been walking toward for longer than he knew. Monday arrived the way the worst weeks always began. Quietly, ordinarily, with nothing in the air to suggest that the ground was about to shift. Lucas was at the building by 6:50, earlier than his scheduled start, because he had not slept well and lying in bed with his eyes open had begun to feel less restful than being upright and moving. He ran his morning routes with the mechanical thoroughness that had sustained him through far worse periods than this. Third floor lighting check, seventh floor door hardware, lobby scuff guards. The slow, methodical rhythm of a man whose hands knew the work well enough to do it without requiring the rest of him. The rest of him was running the calculation. Devlin had said a week, maybe less. That had been Saturday night. Today was Monday. The surveillance contacts had been in position for 17 days. By the standard operational logic Lucas had spent years learning, the assessment phase was either concluding or had already concluded, and what came next was a decision, withdrawal or escalation. The absence of any new contact over the weekend could be read as de-escalation. It could equally be read as the pause before a move. He had not been able to determine which, and the inability to determine it sat behind his sternum like a stone. He kept his patterns exact. He pushed the cart. He changed the bulb on 3. He fixed the hinge on 7. He did not check his phone more than he normally would have. At 9:15 he was on the rooftop, servicing the irrigation line that always needed something at this time of year, when his phone buzzed in his pocket with a number he didn't recognize. He answered it in the way he answered unknown numbers. No name, no greeting, just silence on his end, waiting. "They're pulling back," Devlin's voice. Different number, which meant he'd been careful about this call in a way he hadn't been careful about the previous ones. Lucas kept his hands on the irrigation fitting. "Confirmed? I got the information to the right person in the assessment chain. Took 2 calls I can't take back, but it landed. They've reclassified your status. Inactive. No operational value. No outstanding exposure. You've been taken off the board." The stone behind his sternum didn't disappear, but its character changed, from dread to something more like the aftermath of held breath, the body's slow recalibration when the threat it has been braced for fails to arrive. "When does the pullback complete?" 24 to 48 hours. The contacts you've been tracking will be gone by Wednesday at the latest. Just a pause. "I'd give it a week before I called it clean, but the decision's been made." "What did those 2 calls cost you?" Silence for a moment. "Nothing I wasn't ready to spend." Lucas absorbed this. "Devlin." "Don't," Devlin said in the tone of someone preemptively refusing gratitude they find uncomfortable. "The kid's going to be 7 in December. Buy him something with wheels." "He already has more wheels than the city infrastructure." "Then buy him more." Another pause. "You've got a good life there, Hale. Keep it." The call ended. Lucas stood on the rooftop in the October air and felt the week's accumulated tension move through him and begin, slowly, to release. Not entirely. Not yet, and not until Wednesday confirmed what Devlin had said, and not fully for the week after that, because his training had built caution into him at a cellular level, and it would not simply switch off because a threat had been reclassified. But the acute edge of it softened, and in the space that opened up, other things came back into focus. Ethan's face at the dinner table, narrating the loader's mission. Elena's hands stacking plates in his kitchen without being asked. The stick figures on the rooftop. He finished the irrigation work and went back inside and did not tell anyone what he'd just learned, because there was one person he wanted to tell, and he wanted to do it properly. He found Elena at her office on the 44th floor at 11 o'clock, which was unusual. He rarely went to her floor unless there was a specific maintenance task, and they had a mutual unspoken understanding that their connection, whatever it was, existed in the in-between spaces of the building rather than in the architecture of her professional life. Her assistant, A young man named Theo, who had learned over the past several months to recognize Lucas without obvious surprise at his presence on a floor his badge technically didn't require him to be on, waved him through without comment. He knocked on the open door. Elena was at her desk with 3 screens active and a coffee that had gone cold. She looked up, read his face in approximately 1 second, and said to the phone at her ear, "I'll call you back in 10 minutes. "Yes, thank you." She set it down. "Talk to me." He sat in the chair across from her desk, the guest chair, not the couch she kept near the window for longer meetings, because this was not that kind of conversation. He told her what Devlin had said, clean and direct. Assessment concluded. Status reclassified. Contacts withdrawing. 48 hours to clearance, a week to clean. She listened with her hands flat on the desk, the way she held herself when she was absorbing information she needed to respond to rather than simply receive. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "It's over," she said. "This iteration of it," he said, because he owed her accuracy. "I can't promise it never resurfaces. I can tell you this specific operation, these specific people, have closed the file. And I can tell you I have no reason to believe another will open. But you can't guarantee it." "No?" She nodded slowly. She looked out the window. The city below in its mid-morning motion, glass and steel, and the compressed life of 10 million people going about the ordinary business of their days. Then she looked back at him. "How are you?" she asked. The question, its simplicity, the directness of it, the fact that she'd asked about him before asking about anything else, landed with a weight he hadn't expected. "Tired," he said honestly. "Relieved. Still running a little hot. That doesn't switch off immediately." "I know." She paused. "Ethan?" "He doesn't know any of this happened. He won't." "Good." She said it with finality, the word of someone who had added Ethan's unknowing to her own list of things that needed protecting. They sat for a moment in the particular quiet of a room after a storm. Not peaceful exactly, but honest. The air cleared. "I owe Devlin something significant," Lucas said. "Can you repay it?" "Not directly. He won't accept direct repayment." He paused. "He told me to buy Ethan something with wheels." Elena's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it, something warm. "He sounds like someone who cares more than he lets on." "Most people from that world do." Lucas looked at his hands. "It's one of the things no one tells you about it. You think it's going to make you colder. It does, for a while. And then you meet the people who've been doing it for 20 years and you realize they feel everything. They've just had to build somewhere else to put it." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him. "What?" he said. "I'm just..." She paused, choosing her words with care. "I'm still learning the full shape of you. And every time I think I have the outline, there's more." He held her gaze. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said. "It's the opposite." The phones on her desk began lighting up in the way that phones lit up when a CEO's 10-minute window had been exceeded. The world of Helios Innovations, which had paused for this, was resuming. He stood. "I'll let you work." "Lucas!" He turned at the door. She was still at her desk, both hands flat, watching him with that direct, unguarded quality that she kept mostly for moments when no one else was watching. "I'm glad," she said simply, "that it's over. I'm glad." He held her gaze for one more moment. "Me too," he said. He went back to work. But the week was not finished with him yet. Wednesday arrived and confirmed what Devlin had promised. The white van was gone. The corner near the coffee cart was empty. The parking structure held only cars and the ordinary geography of a building going about its day. Lucas moved through his morning with the careful attention of a man not yet ready to trust the silence, cataloging absences the way he'd cataloged presences, building the negative space of a threat that had withdrawn. By Wednesday afternoon, he was 90% certain it was clean. By Thursday morning, closer to 95. He did not reach 100% because he understood that 100% was a number that lived only in mathematics and not in the kind of world he came from. But he reached the threshold at which a person could breathe without it being a strategic decision, and that was enough. What he had not anticipated was Elena. Not her presence. She was on the rooftop Thursday afternoon, as had become their pattern, with decent coffee and the composed, intelligent attention he had come to depend on without fully acknowledging the degree to which he'd come to depend on it. What he had not anticipated was what she said within the first 10 minutes, delivered in the careful tone of someone who has been holding something and has decided the time for holding it has passed. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked at her. "I've been managing a situation at work," she said, "since last week. I didn't tell you because you were dealing with your own situation, and I didn't want to add to it. And I want you to know first that it's handled. It's resolved as of this morning, but I want you to know it happened." He waited. "Someone on my board," she said, "became aware that I've been spending time with a member of maintenance staff, not through my disclosure, through someone else who noticed and thought it was relevant to bring to the board's attention." She said this with a precise, controlled evenness that told him she was considerably more affected by it than the evenness suggested. "There was a meeting, a private meeting, without me on Tuesday. I found out Wednesday morning when my CFO told me out of courtesy before anyone else could." Lucas was very still. "What was the concern?" "Optics. Influence. Whether you might have access to privileged information through proximity to me." She paused. "And honestly, whether my judgment could be trusted if I was—" She stopped. "Involved with a janitor," he said. No particular inflection. She looked at him directly. Their word was distracted, which I think we both understand was doing significant work. He was quiet for a moment. He processed this with the same systematic care he processed everything, looking at the shape of it, not the offense of it, not yet, but the operational reality. "What did you tell them?" "I told them my personal life is not subject to board oversight unless it creates a material conflict of interest, which it does not. I told them that the character and history of the people I choose to spend time with is my determination to make and not theirs. And I told them—" She paused. "I told them that if any member of this board attempted to use my personal relationships as leverage over my professional decisions again, I would consider it a fundamental breach of the trust this role requires, and I would act accordingly." He looked at her. "What does acting accordingly look like?" "In practice? Probably nothing. They backed down immediately once I made the position clear. The meeting was an overreach, and most of them knew it before they were halfway through it. But I wanted them to know I knew, and I wanted them to know I wasn't going to pretend it hadn't happened." Lucas was quiet. "I'm telling you," Elena said, "because I told you I wouldn't disappear on you and call it protecting you. This affected you, your position, your reputation in this building. You had a right to know." He looked at the city below. He looked at his hands. He thought about the geometry of what she had just described. A woman who ran a 62-floor company sitting in a boardroom and telling the people who technically held authority over her employment that the man she was choosing to spend time with was her decision and none of their business. And he felt something that was partly complicated and partly not complicated at all. "Are you okay?" he said. She seemed slightly surprised by the question, as though she'd been preparing for a different response. "Yes, I'm fine. I've handled harder rooms." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. "Are you okay?" She was quiet for a moment. "It was unpleasant," she said more quietly. "Not the confrontation. I'm good at confrontation. But the knowledge that someone was watching and categorizing and deciding it was appropriate to bring to a committee." She paused. "It reminded me that this building is not actually a private space." "I know," he said. "I've always known that. I'm sorry you found out in that way." "Don't apologize for existing," she said, with a sharpness that was protective rather than harsh. "I'm not apologizing for existing. I'm saying I'm sorry you were put in that position." She accepted this. She looked out at the city. The afternoon light was going golden and long, the particular quality of autumn light that made everything look like a memory you hadn't had yet. "Does it change anything?" she asked. "For you?" He considered the question seriously, which she recognized as his way of honoring it. "It tells me something about the cost," he said, "which I think I owed you honesty about from the beginning, but maybe wasn't fully realistic about myself." He paused. "Proximity to me has costs. My past has costs. The way people see me, the uniform, the badge, the history I can't disclose. All of that has costs that fall on you in ways I can't fully control. I know that, she said. I know you know it abstractly. I'm saying now it's arrived in a specific and real form. She turned to look at him. Lucas, I told you I'm not going anywhere. I said it when there was less at stake. I said it when we were dealing with Sokolov's people. I'm saying it now that someone has decided my relationship with you is appropriate subject matter for a boardroom. Her voice was steady, with a steadiness that was not performed. The cost is real. I've assessed the cost. I'm still here. He held her gaze. Why? He said. Not challenging, genuinely asking. She was quiet for a moment. Because I spent 4 years building a life that looked exactly like the life I was supposed to want. Impressive and well-managed and protected from anything that might complicate it. And it was good. It was genuinely good. She paused. But it wasn't this. What is this? She looked at him with the direct, unguarded quality she usually kept for moments when no one was watching. This is real, she said. You're the most genuinely real person I've met in a long time. Not in spite of the complications, because of them. Because you've been through the things that strip away everything that isn't essential, and what's left is someone who means what he says and says only what he means and loves his son with every single thing he has. She stopped. I don't walk away from real things. It's not in my nature. The city below them went about its quiet indifference. Lucas reached across the small distance between them and very carefully put his hand over hers where it rested on the railing. He didn't look at her when he did it. He looked at the city. Her hand turned under his and held it. They stood at the railing for a long time without speaking, and the silence was the easiest thing Lucas had felt in years. He told Ethan that evening. Not about the surveillance, not about Devlin, not about any of the operational specifics. But Ethan was 6 years old and could read his father's moods with an accuracy that had never required explanation. And the shift in Lucas after the past weeks, the slow unknotting of something that had been held very tightly, had not gone unnoticed. They were at the kitchen table after dinner, Ethan drawing and Lucas watching him draw, when Ethan looked up and said, with the matter-of-fact directness that was his most consistent quality, "Is the worried quiet done?" Lucas looked at his son. "Mostly," he said. "Yeah. Because of the thing you weren't telling me." Lucas held very still. "What makes you think there was a thing?" Ethan put his crayon down. Lucas had long since accepted, his mother's eyes, dark and direct and oriented toward the truth of things rather than the surface. "Dad," he said patiently, "I'm 6. I'm not a baby." "I know you're not a baby." So, Lucas looked at his son for a moment. He thought about what it meant to raise an honest person, whether it was possible to build honesty in someone else if you withheld the framework of it from them. He thought about the promise he'd made to himself the night Ethan was born, about what kind of life and what kind of person he was going to be in the building of that life. "There were some people," he said carefully, "who were interested in finding out about things from before you were born." Ethan considered this. Bad people? Not exactly bad. People with interests that weren't compatible with ours. Did they go away? Yes, they decided we weren't relevant to them. Ethan thought about this with his drawing face on, the focused, inward expression of someone processing. "Were you scared?" "I was vigilant," Lucas said. "That's the same as scared but more organized," Ethan said. Lucas looked at the ceiling. Yes, that's accurate. It's okay to be scared." He picked his crayon back up. "Miss Okafor says that a lot. Miss Okafor is very wise. She also says the important thing is what you do while you're scared." He resumed drawing without looking up. "What did you do?" "I kept our patterns normal. I got information from someone I trust. I waited. And we stayed?" "And we stayed." Ethan nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good," he said, and his crayon moved across the paper with the confidence of someone who had asked the question he needed to ask and received the answer that confirmed what he'd already believed. "I like it here." Lucas looked at his son. "Yeah," he said softly. "Me too." "Because of Miss Elena?" "Among other reasons." Ethan looked up with a slight smile, a smile that Lucas recognized with a jolt because it was his mother's smile, appearing sometimes on this face that was mostly Lucas's, arriving without warning and leaving a quality of light in its wake. "She's going to be around more now," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. "If that's okay with you." The smile widened. "I need someone to teach the pasta lemon recipe to so you don't have to make it every time." "That's your criteria?" "I have high standards." He looked back at his drawing. "Also, she was right about the waves. I'm fixing the drawing." Lucas watched his son make careful corrections to a crayon portrait of a woman with wave loop hair standing beside two stick figures on a rooftop. He felt the particular compound thing, the love, the weight, the fear, and underneath it all, the bedrock. But tonight the proportions were different. Tonight the bedrock was closer to the surface than it had been in a long time. "Dad," Ethan said. "Yeah. Do you love her?" The kitchen was quiet. Lucas had spent years building defenses against questions that reached too far in too directly. He had answers for almost everything, prepared positions and redirects, and the particular verbal judo of someone who had spent too long in a world where information was leverage. He had answers for questions that came at him from hostile directions and neutral ones, and the well-meaning directions of people who cared about him. He did not have an answer for this question, asked in this voice, by this person. "I'm working on it," he said. Ethan considered this. "Working on it means yes," he said. "But you want to be sure first." "That's correct." "How long does being sure take?" "I don't know. I've never been sure about something like this before." Ethan put the crayon down and looked at his father with an expression that was several things at once: compassion and exasperation, and the particular patience of someone who is 6 years old and watching an adult be unnecessarily complicated about something obvious. "Dad," he said, "she fixed her plant pot because you told her to." Lucas blinked. "What?" "The plants on her desk. She moved them to a pot with holes. I saw when I visited the building." He picked up the crayon again. "People don't fix their plants for someone they don't really like." Lucas stared at his son. "That's my opinion," Ethan added professionally. He went back to drawing. Lucas sat at the kitchen table for a long moment, looking at the ceiling, feeling something move through him that was warm and unguarded and that he did not try to categorize or contain. Then he stood, cleared the remaining dinner dishes, and began washing up with the quiet, methodical attention he brought to all things, and tried not to smile too widely at the philosophical contribution of a 6-year-old. He didn't entirely succeed. Friday morning, Lucas arrived at work to find a note in the maintenance staff's internal message tray. A handwritten one, on heavy cream paper, which was sufficiently unusual that the reception staff member who'd put it there gave it a slightly odd quality of placement, as if it had arrived bearing its own authority. It read, "Rooftop, noon, both succulents survived. E.C." He read it twice. He folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. He went to work. At noon, he pushed through the rooftop door to find Elena standing at the east railing with coffee. Good coffee this time. From somewhere outside the building, with the logo of the place 3 blocks east that charged too much and was worth it. She was looking at the city in the way she looked at it when she'd already decided something and was enjoying the moment before she said it. She held one of the cups out to him without turning around. He took it and stood beside her. "Both succulents," he said. "Both succulents," she confirmed. "The one I thought was beyond saving put out 2 new leaves this week." She paused. "I feel unreasonably proud of this." "You should. It takes patience." She turned to look at him, and there was something different in her expression today. Something that had released the same quality he'd felt in himself after Devlin's call, but with its own distinct character, its own specific shape. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the succulents? About the fact that I have spent 4 years being extraordinarily competent at managing a company and considerably less competent at managing my personal life." She looked at him with the honest, unguarded quality that appeared when she'd stopped performing and arrived at the thing she actually meant. "And I've been thinking that the 2 skills are not actually that different, that both of them require you to be willing to commit to something before you know exactly how it's going to turn out." He held her gaze. "I committed to this company when I was 31 years old and terrified," she said. "I said yes before I was ready, and I built what I needed to build while I was doing it." She paused. "I think this is the same kind of thing." "This," he said. "Us," she said, and the word landed with the particular weight of a word that has been chosen carefully from among other possible words and selected because it was the most accurate one. He looked at her, at the way the afternoon light found her, the waves in her hair that Ethan was correcting in the drawing, the direct and undeflecting quality of her attention, and thought about a 6-year-old who fixed plants as evidence of affection, and about a man who had carried a photograph of an ultrasound into places no photograph should have gone, and about the fact that the willingness to keep something precious in the most dangerous territory of your life was its own kind of statement about what mattered. "Yeah," he said. "Us." She looked at him for one more moment, and then she turned back to the city, and he turned back with her, and they stood at the railing together with the city below them, and the coffee going warm in their hands, and the afternoon moving around them in its quiet, unstoppable way. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "Ethan has a school thing, 3 weeks from now. A presentation. The kids do a thing where they talk about someone who matters to them." He paused. "He's asked if he can talk about you." She went very still. "I told him I needed to check with you first," Lucas continued. "He thought that was unnecessary. He had some opinions about that." "He usually does," she said. Her voice had gone slightly unsteady. "So, is it okay for him to... You don't have to... Yes," she said, not after deliberation, immediately, with a certainty that was complete. "Yes. Tell him yes." Lucas nodded. He looked at his coffee cup. "He wants to talk about how you notice things," he said. He's been thinking about what to say, apparently. He told me last night that the most important thing about you is that you notice what's real." He paused. "He said that's rare." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "He's right," she said very softly. "And so is he." They stood at the railing. Below them, the city moved in its endless, indifferent life. A million separate stories intersecting and diverging in the dense geography of glass and steel and sidewalk. Among those stories, 2 people stood on a rooftop with coffee in the afternoon light, and neither of them said the important word yet, because neither of them needed to. The direction was clear. The direction had been clear for a long time. That evening, Lucas collected Ethan from school, and they walked home the long way. Through the park, past the hot dog cart on Meridian, through the block where the construction was ongoing and the excavators sat idle in the dusk, waiting for tomorrow. Ethan provided a running assessment of the equipment. Lucas listened. At the corner near their building, Ethan looked up at his father with his mother's eyes and his own particular expression, the one that meant he was going to say something true. "She said yes," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. "She said yes." He nodded, satisfied, vindicated. "I knew she would." "I know you knew." "Because she fixed the plants." "Among other reasons," Lucas said. They went up in the elevator and into the apartment, and Ethan dropped his backpack on the floor in the way he dropped it every day, a backpack-shaped protest against the concept of hooks. And Lucas picked it up and hung it on the hook, and they went into the kitchen and began the Friday ritual of pasta and the specific negotiation of which of the 17 variations the evening required. Ethan chose the lemon one. Lucas started the water. Outside, the city did what cities do, breathing and grinding and glittering in its nighttime skin, entirely unaware of the small and enormous things happening inside the ordinary walls of the lives it contained. The locks were checked. The camera was confirmed. The bag in the closet sat where it had always sat, undisturbed, needed less now than it had been before. And in the kitchen of a small apartment in the Helios district, a man who had once fought silent wars in places no one would acknowledge made pasta with the precision of someone who understood that the most important things required the same quality of attention as the most dangerous ones, and waited for the lemon to do what it always did, which was to make everything it touched both sharp and bright at once. Ethan sat at the table with his drawing of the rooftop. He had added a new detail since last night. A third figure, smaller than the other 2, standing between them with both arms raised. Lucas saw it and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The 3 weeks between Friday's pasta dinner and Ethan's school presentation passed with a quality of time that Lucas had not experienced in years. Not the compressed, vigilant time of operational readiness, not the carefully managed time of a man building a constructed life, but something looser and more genuine. Time that moved at the speed of things actually happening, rather than things being monitored. Elena came to dinner on the following Wednesday, and the Wednesday after that. The third Wednesday, she arrived before dinner while Lucas was still cooking, and sat at the kitchen counter and talked to Ethan about excavators, while Lucas made the pasta with tomatoes and basil that Ethan had determined was the appropriate choice for guests who had now graduated from introductory lemon, and somewhere in the middle of that ordinary Wednesday evening, without announcement or ceremony, the apartment shifted its character. It became quietly and entirely without drama, a space that contained 3 people rather than 2. Lucas noticed it and said nothing. Ethan noticed it and said everything. "You sit in the same chair every time," Ethan told Elena on the third Wednesday, with the tone of someone making a scientific observation. "It's a good chair," Elena said. "Dad always sits there when he's thinking hard about something." "Then I'm in good company." Ethan considered this. "I sit on the floor when I'm thinking," he said, "so I have more room." He looked at her with his mother's direct dark eyes. "Where do you sit when you're thinking?" "At my desk, usually, though sometimes I stand at the window." "That's not really sitting." "No," she agreed. "I suppose it isn't." "Maybe you need a better floor," Ethan said with the confident generosity of someone offering a genuine solution. Elena looked at Lucas across the kitchen island with an expression that was trying to remain composed and not entirely succeeding. Lucas turned back to the pasta and did not help her. These were the evenings, small and unglamorous and built from nothing more remarkable than food and conversation and a child's relentless philosophical inquiry, that Lucas found himself returning to during the ordinary hours of his workdays, the way you return to a room that has good light, not analyzing them, just remembering them, the way you remember things that have started to constitute your life rather than just your schedule. The rooftop conversations continued, but their texture had changed. The careful, incremental quality of 2 people establishing trust had given way to something more settled, not less attentive, but differently attentive. The way attention shifts when the question being asked changes from, "Can I trust this person?" to "What does this person need today?" Lucas noticed Elena watching him with less assessment and more simple interest. He noticed himself talking more freely than he had talked to any person since before Ethan, unspooling the details of his interior life with a caution that was real but diminishing. He told her about the years of the work, not the classified specifics, but the emotional geography of it. The way the silence between operations had been harder than the operations themselves. The way he'd learned to sleep in 4-hour increments and had spent 2 years after leaving unable to sleep longer than that, lying awake in the second 4-hour block waiting for a mission that wasn't coming. The particular loneliness of a world where your truest self was the one nobody knew existed, and the person everyone interacted with was a construction, however skilled. He told her about Ethan's mother, more than he had told anyone, more than he'd thought he would. Her name was Marisol. She had been a translator working in the same region of the world where Lucas had been stationed. They had met at a checkpoint, of all places, under circumstances that in retrospect had a quality of comedy that neither of them had been able to see at the time. She had been ferociously intelligent and almost categorically unimpressed by everything he was trained to project, which had been, he told Elena, the most disorienting and significant thing anyone had ever done to him up to that point in his life. "She sounds like she would have been formidable," Elena said. "She was," he said. "In every way." He paused. "Ethan has her eyes, and her instinct for truth, and her complete indifference to performing for an audience. He definitely has that last one. He demonstrated it last Tuesday by telling his teacher that the book she was reading aloud had a factual error about migratory birds and then providing a correction, with citations. Elena stared at him. He cited sources. He had been watching a nature documentary. He felt the information was relevant. She put her coffee down and pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth. "He cited sources," she said again to herself, in the tone of someone confronting evidence that exceeds their existing model. Ms. Okafor sent a note home that was impressive in how carefully it balanced pride and exasperation. "I would like to frame that note." "I did frame it," Lucas said, and Elena laughed the real laugh again, the one that started below the surface, and Lucas filed it alongside all the other small, specific things he was collecting and no longer trying to pretend he wasn't collecting. Mom. The day of Ethan's school presentation was a Thursday in early November, and the city had decided to mark the occasion by delivering the first genuinely cold morning of the season. A sharp, clear cold that turned breath visible and made the light come in at the low, brilliant angle of real autumn. Lucas walked Ethan to school with their breath making small clouds in the air. Ethan in his red jacket and a new hat that he had selected on the grounds that it was the same blue as his favorite crayon. "Are you nervous?" Lucas asked. "No," Ethan said immediately, and then, after a pause, "A little, but nervous means I care about it. Ms. Okafor says that." "Ms. Okafor says a lot of useful things. She's very experienced," Ethan said. Then, "Is Miss Elena coming?" "She has a meeting that ends at 11:30. She's going to try to come for part of it." Ethan processed this. "Tell her my part is in the middle." "I'll tell her. And that parking on Elm is better than Meridian before noon." Lucas looked at his son. "How do you know about parking on Elm?" "Gerald told me," Ethan said with the serenity of someone who had cultivated a useful network. "Gerald knows everything about this neighborhood." They walked another half block. The morning was cold and bright, and the city moved around them with its usual beautiful indifference to the specific weight of this particular Thursday. "Ethan," Lucas said. "Yeah. Whatever you say today, I want you to know that whatever you've decided to say, it's the right thing to say. You don't have to perform for me. You don't have to manage what I think or feel about it." Ethan looked up at his father with his mother's eyes, calm and direct. "I know," he said. "You always tell me the truth, so I always tell you the truth." He looked back at the sidewalk ahead of them. "It's easier that way." Lucas held on to that for the rest of the walk. But the presentations happened in the school's small assembly room. 23 first graders and their families, the particular dense warmth of too many people in a room designed for half of them, the smell of crayons and institutional floor polish, and someone's coffee from the cardboard tray near the back. Lucas sat in the third row with his coat folded on his lap and watched the room with the observational habit that never fully left him, except that today what he was observing was children. A small girl in a yellow dress talking about her grandmother's garden. A boy with a gap in his front teeth describing his father's repair shop. The accumulated particular world of a first-grade classroom, each presentation a window into a life. He watched Elena come in at 11:42, slipping through the back door with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to entering rooms that were already in progress without disrupting them. She spotted him and moved down the side aisle to take the empty seat beside him. She was still in her work clothes, the dark coat, the controlled professional bearing, but something about her face when she sat down and looked toward the front of the room was entirely unguarded. "Did I miss him?" she'd whispered. "He's next." She settled, unwinding her scarf. Their shoulders were close in the tight seating. She smelled like cold air and the good coffee from the place 3 blocks east. "I took Elm Street," she whispered. "I know." She looked at him, and even in the low light of the assembly room he could see the flicker of amusement. "Gerald," she said. "Gerald," he confirmed. And then Ethan walked to the front of the room, and they both went still. He was small in the way 6-year-olds are small in adult spaces. The podium was at the wrong height. The room was full of people bigger than him. The expectation of the moment had a weight that even a child who didn't perform for audiences could presumably feel. He stood at the front with his drawings under one arm. He had made new ones specifically for this, Lucas knew, working on them at the kitchen table with the focused intensity he brought to important projects, and looked at the room with his mother's eyes, directly, without flinching, taking it in rather than performing for it. He found his father first. He found Elena second. Something in his expression settled at both of those findings, not dramatically, just the small recalibration of someone who has confirmed that the things that matter are where they should be. He put his drawings on the little ledge of the podium. He looked at the room. "The person I want to talk about," he said, in his clear, carrying voice that Ms. Okafor had told Lucas was remarkable for a first grader, "is Miss Elena. She works in the building where my dad works. She runs the whole building. She's the boss of everybody in it." A small ripple of interest through the parent section. The reason I picked her, Ethan continued, with the measured pace of someone who had thought carefully about what they wanted to say and intended to say all of it, is not because she's the boss. Lots of people are bosses. The reason is because she notices things. He held up the first drawing. It was the rooftop, the planters, the railing, the city suggested in the background in blue and gray crayon, and two figures standing side by side. My dad is very good at noticing things, Ethan said. He notices everything. He notices if something is wrong before it happens, and he notices what people need before they say it. That's how he is. He paused. But Miss Elena notices things too, and that's rarer than you think, because lots of people are too busy or too worried about themselves to really notice other people. Lucas was looking at his son and not at Elena, but he was aware of Elena beside him with a peripheral precision that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with the fact of her. She noticed my dad, Ethan said simply, when he did the thing with the drone. He held up the second drawing, the lobby, the crowd, a small figure in a red jacket, a larger figure mid-slide across the pavement. Everyone saw it, but she was the only one who really looked at it. She wanted to understand what she saw. He set the drawing down. And then she kept noticing him, even when it would have been easier not to. A woman in the second row pressed her hand briefly to her heart. Lucas was very still. She also fixed her plants because my dad told her how, Ethan added, in a slightly more practical register. Which I think is important because it means she listens. A small laugh moved through the room. Ethan acknowledged it with the slight nod of someone who had made a deliberate point and was pleased it had landed. The thing about Miss Elena, he said, returning to the center of what he wanted to say, is that she sees the real thing about people and not just the surface thing. My dad says that's a rare skill. I think it's also a kind thing, because a lot of people have real things about them that they don't show to everyone. And if nobody ever sees those real things, then it's like they're carrying them alone. He paused. Miss Elena doesn't let people carry things alone if she can help it. He held up the third drawing. It was the one Lucas had seen on the kitchen table, the rooftop, the two figures, the smaller third figure between them with both arms raised. He had refined it since then, adding detail with the careful hand of someone who understood that important things deserve the full quality of your attention. The glass tower in the background, the planters in green, three figures close together in the cold, bright air. I drew us on the roof, Ethan said, because that's where they go. That's where they talk about the real things. He looked at the drawing for a moment with the expression of an artist assessing his own work. I put myself in the middle because that's where I am. He looked at the room. Not because I'm the most important one, but because that's how families work. Everyone has a place, and everyone holds the middle for someone. The room was very quiet. Ethan put the drawing down. He looked at his father. He looked at Elena. Then he looked at the room with the composed, unperforming directness that was his most fundamental quality. That's what I wanted to say, he said. Afterward, in the school hallway, the organized chaos of a presentation day winding down, children running, parents collecting coats and drawings, the smell of crayons intensifying as doors opened. Lucas stood near the lockers and did not trust himself to speak for approximately 45 seconds. Elena found him there. She didn't say anything either, for a moment. She stood beside him in the hallway with the noise of the school around them, and her coat half unbuttoned from the warmth of the assembly room, and she looked at him with an expression that was the most open he had ever seen on her face. Stripped of the CEO composure, stripped of the careful management, just the face of a person who has received something they didn't know they needed until the moment it arrived. He said that, Lucas said finally, meaning all of it, the whole 3 minutes. He said that, Elena confirmed, her voice slightly unsteady in a way he had never heard before. I didn't. He stopped, started again. He prepared it without telling me. He showed me the drawings but not the words. I know, you would have told me. I would have tried to manage it, prepare you. I'm glad you couldn't. She looked at him. I'm glad it arrived the way it arrived. He understood what she meant, unmediated, unprepared for, the truth of a 6-year-old delivered without the layer of adult management that would have softened it into something smaller than it was. Ethan appeared at Lucas's elbow, still carrying his drawings with great care. He looked at Elena with his assessment face. You cried a little, he said. I did not cry, Elena said. Your eyes were shiny. It was the lighting. Ethan looked at the fluorescent hallway lights overhead and then back at Elena with an expression that made his position on the lighting theory entirely clear without requiring words. Ethan, Lucas said. I'm just saying, Ethan said. Thank you, Elena said, crouching down to his level in the way she had in the lobby that first time, natural and genuine. What you said was, it was one of the most extraordinary things anyone has ever said about me. Ethan considered this. It was true, he said, with the slight implied correction of someone who doesn't distinguish between extraordinary and accurate. I only said true things. I know, she said. That's what made it extraordinary. He thought about this, apparently found it logically sound, and nodded. Then he held out the rooftop drawing. The three figures, the glass tower, the careful green of the planters. This one's for you, he said. I made it for you specifically. Elena took it. She held it with both hands, looking at it, and when she looked up, there was nothing in her expression that was being managed at all. I'm going to put this somewhere important, she said. Good, Ethan said, satisfied. Then, with the conversational pivot of a child who has completed an important piece of business and is ready to move on. Can we get hot dogs? Bob. They got hot dogs on a Meridian, at the cart that used the right amount of mustard. The three of them walked south through the late morning, the city in its November light, sharp and low and making everything look more decided than it had before. Ethan ate his hot dog with total focus and narrated simultaneously a theory about which buildings would make the best bases for excavator operations, a project he appeared to have been developing for some time with considerable architectural ambition. Elena ate her hot dog. She looked around the city. She looked at Lucas. She looked at Ethan. She looked, Lucas thought, like someone who had arrived somewhere. He knew the feeling. It had been arriving in him incrementally for months, and it had been arriving all at once this morning in a school assembly room while his son stood at a podium and said the truest thing anyone had said about any of them in a long time. And it was completing itself now, on a sidewalk on a November morning with hot dogs and a 6-year-old's urban planning ambitions filling the air. Elena, he said. She looked at him. He had spent a long time thinking about words. He was a man who used them carefully, who had spent years in a profession where words were either weapons or waste, and rarely anything in between, and who had, in building his new life, discovered that they could be something else entirely, that they could be honest, and that honesty was not weakness but the specific form of courage that cost the most and mattered the most. I love you, he said, not quietly, not whispered, not managed, just said, in his usual voice, on a sidewalk in November, with the city running its continuous indifferent life around them. Elena stopped walking. Ethan walked 3 more steps, realized he was alone, turned around, looked at both of them, and very deliberately took another bite of his hot dog while looking at a point somewhere above their heads with exaggerated casualness. Elena looked at Lucas. Her expression had this quality of something that had been waiting long enough that its arrival was both completely expected and somehow still a surprise. The way the first snow of the season always surprised people despite the fact that it was entirely predictable and had been predicted. I love you too, she said, simply, directly. In her own voice, on the same sidewalk, under the same November light. Ethan continued studying the architecture overhead. Lucas looked at the woman in front of him, the woman who had noticed him when it would have been easier not to, who had asked about his son before asking about anything else, who had told a boardroom full of people that his proximity to her life was her decision to make, who had fixed her plants and kept her succulents alive, and stood at rooftop railings in the cold with bad coffee and good coffee, and listened to the shape of a life that was not simple and had decided it was worth being adjacent to, and felt something complete itself in him. Not the completion of something finished, but the completion of something that had been building toward its own foundation, finding it at last. I know, Ethan said, from 3 steps ahead, still looking at the buildings. They both looked at him. I've known for a long time, he said, and took another bite of his hot dog with the composure of a person delivering a long-anticipated verdict. I told you about the plants. He resumed walking. Lucas looked at Elena. Elena looked at Lucas. Something passed between them that was too specific and too genuine for any single word to carry. The recognition of two people who have arrived somewhere they didn't fully plan for and find, upon arrival, that it is exactly right. They followed Ethan down the sidewalk. The weeks that came after had a texture that Lucas turned over in his hand sometimes. In the quiet moments between tasks, trying to understand what exactly had changed, and finding that the change was not locatable in any single thing, but was distributed across everything like light in a room. You couldn't point to the sun, but you could see clearly. He still checked the locks 3 times. He probably always would. Some habits were built at a depth that redecoration couldn't reach, and he had made peace with this as a feature of himself rather than a flaw. Ethan had stopped counting the checks and started participating, calling out 1 and 2 and 3 from wherever he was in the apartment, which had turned a ritual of vigilance into something warmer without making it less real. Lucas found this to be characteristic of his son, exactly the right solution to a problem that hadn't required solving, only accepting. The hall closet still held its bag. He had updated it twice in the past month. Current maps, refreshed supplies, the things that needed refreshing. He did not remove it, because removing it would have been a performance of security rather than the thing itself, and Lucas Hale had stopped performing things years ago. The bag was there because the world was the world, and the world being the world did not mean that his life could not also be good. Both things were true. He had spent a long time believing they were mutually exclusive. He no longer did. Devlin sent a message in mid-November, not a call, a written message through the channels they'd established, brief and operationally clean, file closed at the source, reorganization complete. Your status has been removed from all active documentation. Consider yourself archived. And then below the operational content, in the same precise shorthand they'd always used, "Kid have a good birthday?" Lucas had written back, "Not yet, December. He wants an excavator." The response came 4 hours later. "Real or toy?" "Both, if I'm reading him correctly." Reading him correctly, Devlin wrote, and nothing else, which was, Lucas had decided, as close to warmth as Devlin's particular architecture allowed, and he had accepted it in the spirit it was offered. Elena rearranged her schedule on the 3rd Thursday of November so that she finished work at 4 instead of 7. She showed up at Ethan's school with Lucas for the parent-teacher conference that he'd mentioned in passing 2 weeks earlier, and if Ms. Okafor was surprised to see the CEO of Helios Innovations sitting in a small chair in her first-grade classroom asking thoughtful questions about Ethan's reading development, she was professional enough not to show it for more than a moment. Ethan, when told afterward, said, "Good. I wanted her to hear about the bird correction." "She's aware of the bird correction," Lucas said. "It's important that she knows I was right." "Ms. Okafor told her you were right," Elena said. Ethan looked satisfied. "Ms. Okafor is experienced," he confirmed. The rooftop remained theirs. Through November's cold and December's colder, they came there with good coffee and the particular quality of attention that each of them brought to things that mattered. And they talked about the things that people talked about when they had decided to build something together. Not the landmark conversations, not the declared moments, but the texture of it, the accumulating ordinary detail. What Ethan had decided about blue versus green as a superior color, and why the answer had recently shifted to green because of excavators. What Elena's board had said in the meeting immediately following the one where she'd told them to mind their business. What Lucas thought about in the hour after Ethan was asleep, when the apartment was quiet, and the city made its low sound outside the window. He told her he thought about her. She told him she'd been thinking about making a change. He looked at her. "Not leaving," she said immediately, reading his face. "Not anything like that." She paused. "The company runs. It runs well. I built a good team, and the team does good work, and my presence in every meeting of every day it's a habit more than a necessity at this point." She looked at the city. "I've been thinking about what I would build if I weren't building for the company, what problem I would try to solve." "What problem would you try to solve?" She was quiet for a moment. "There are buildings in this city, a lot of buildings, not just this one, where the people who maintain them, who keep them running, are essentially invisible to the people who benefit from that work. Not through malice, usually, through inattention." She paused. "I've been thinking about what a company would look like that didn't do that. that built the infrastructure recognition into the structure from the beginning. She looked at him. I don't know what that looks like yet. I'm still at the thinking stage. He looked at her. You want to build something new. I want to build something real, she said. He was quiet for a moment, feeling the familiar compound of recognition. The way she articulated things he had only felt as a pressure, unnamed and unlocatable. The reason he had stayed at this job for 14 months wasn't the pay or the proximity or any strategic consideration. It was that the work was honest and the result was visible, and at the end of every day, something was genuinely better than it had been at the beginning. When you're ready to start thinking out loud about it, he said, I want to be in that conversation. She looked at him with the direct, unguarded expression. Yeah? I know buildings, he said, and I know what gets missed when people aren't paying attention. You know everything about what gets missed when people aren't paying attention, she said, and there was a warmth in it that was not irony. He held her gaze. We'd be good at it, he said, together. She was quiet for a moment, absorbing the together, the word doing its specific and significant work. We would, she said. Yeah. December arrived, and with it the particular energy of a child approaching a birthday, with the complete conviction that the event warranted global recognition. Ethan turned 7 on the 14th, and the occasion was marked by a dinner at the apartment with the specific pasta he designated as birthday pasta. Not the lemon one, which was for Elena, and not the tomato basil one, which was for guests, but the one with the slow-cooked sauce that Lucas made only on occasions of formal significance, and which Ethan referred to as the serious pasta in a tone that foreclosed all debate. Elena brought the excavator. It was a good one. The kind that came in a box large enough that Ethan, upon seeing it, stood completely still for 4 full seconds, which was an eternity in his operating tempo. Then he looked at Elena with an expression that contained, in approximately equal measure, joy and the very serious business of assessing whether the model lived up to specification. This is a 336 series, he said. I was told that was important. Who told you? Gerald. Ethan nodded slowly, the nod of someone recognizing that an intelligence network had been properly utilized. Gerald knows his equipment, he allowed. He's experienced, Elena said, and Ethan looked at her with an expression of such pure delight at hearing his own word returned to him that Lucas had to look at the ceiling. They ate the serious pasta at the small kitchen table, which was not quite large enough for 3 people when one of them was operating at the energy level that a birthday and a 336 series excavator combined could produce in a 7-year-old, but which managed the occasion with the minor chaos that Lucas had come to understand was not the enemy of warmth, but its most reliable companion. After dinner, Ethan deployed the excavator on the living room floor with the purposefulness of a field commander executing a long-considered plan. Lucas and Elena sat on the couch with coffee, close enough that their shoulders touched, and watched. He's building something, Elena said, watching the systematic movement of the excavator across the floor. He's always building something, Lucas said. What's the project? She called to Ethan. Ethan looked up. Infrastructure, he said, as if this were obvious. You have to have the infrastructure before you can build the buildings. He went back to work. Elena looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at Elena. He's your son, she said. He is. He just used the word infrastructure on his 7th birthday while operating an excavator. He's been thinking about urban planning for several weeks. I know. I'm in his network. She paused. Gerald keeps me informed. Lucas put his arm around her shoulders, and she settled into the space the way she settled into rooms, taking exactly as much as she needed and not an inch more, which was its own form of abundance. They sat together on the couch in the small apartment with the city outside the window and the particular music of a 7-year-old's birthday construction project filling the living room. And Lucas thought about the calculation he'd been running for the past year, the one that balanced threat against stability, the past against the present, surviving against living. He had been running that calculation so long he'd almost forgotten what he was calculating toward. He knew now. This was what he'd been calculating toward. Not the absence of risk. That didn't exist, had never existed, and he was done pretending it was a destination he could reach. But this, a couch, and a coffee, and a shoulder, and a child building infrastructure on his birthday. and the specific quality of an evening that was not performing safety, but simply being it, because the people in it had decided to make it so. "Lucas," Elena said quietly. "Yeah." "Tell me something about Marisol." He looked at her. The question arrived without warning and without agenda. Just a genuine request, the kind that only came from people who had already decided they were in it fully, who understood that the people who came before were not competition but context, were not ghosts to be managed, but lives that had shaped the living. He thought for a moment. "She would have been terrible at the plants," he said. "She had strong opinions about them and would have overruled me and killed them all within a month and blamed the soil." He paused. "She would have liked you. She would have said you were real, which was the best thing she said about anyone." He paused again. "She would have been ferociously proud of him." Elena was quiet for a moment. "He's proof that she was real," she said. "Yeah." He looked at Ethan on the floor. "Yeah, she is." They sat with that for a moment, not heavily, not with grief's full architecture, but with the appropriate weight of something that mattered and was allowed to matter without taking over the room. Ethan looked up. He looked at his father. He looked at Elena. He looked at the place where their shoulders touched, and where Lucas's arm had settled around her. He looked back at his excavator. "Good," he said, to no one in particular, or possibly to everyone, and went back to the infrastructure. Later, after Ethan was asleep with his arm over his head and the excavator parked carefully beside the bed, in the position of an honored guest, Lucas stood at the kitchen window and looked at the city. He had stood at this window many times over the past 14 months. He had stood here in the earliest days when the apartment was still unfamiliar and every sound in the building was something to assess. He had stood here in the careful middle period when the life was constructed and functional but still felt, sometimes, like a stage set for a life rather than the thing itself. He had stood here during the weeks of the surveillance, running calculations at 2 a.m. while Ethan slept and the city glittered with its usual beautiful indifference. He stood here now, and the city looked the same as it always had. The glass and steel, the lights, the compressed, uncontainable life of 10 million people going about the enormous ordinary business of their days. He felt different, not transformed, not healed in the clean, story-shaped way that implied all previous damage had been resolved and filed away. He was still a man with 3 locks and a bag in the closet, and eyes that tracked movement in his peripheral vision before his brain had fully registered it was doing so. He was still a man with a past that had weight and edges, that would not be wished into simplicity by the passage of time. But he was also a man who had spent the past year in a building that contained, on its 44th floor and on its rooftop and in its lobby and in the small space between a railing and a city view, something he hadn't expected to find there: himself. The version of himself that was left when everything that wasn't essential had been stripped away. Elena's hand touched his shoulder from behind. She had come out of the living room quietly, her coat on, ready to head home, and had found him at the window. He didn't turn around. She stood behind him for a moment, her hand on his shoulder, both of them looking at the city. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He thought about the honest answer. "About the fact that I've been preparing to lose things for so long," he said, "that I forgot to prepare for keeping them." She was quiet for a moment. Her hand didn't move. "What does keeping them look like?" she asked. He turned from the window to face her. She was in the kitchen doorway, coat buttoned, ready to go. And also, in some quality of her presence, not going anywhere, not in the way that mattered. "Like this," he said. "This exact thing." She looked at him with the open, unguarded expression. The one that belonged to moments when no one else was watching, except that he was watching, and she knew it, and that was the point. "Then keep it," she said. He reached out and took her hand. She let him and held it, and for a moment they stood in the kitchen of a small apartment in the Helios district with the city outside the window and the sound of a 7-year-old sleeping in the next room and the particular quality of stillness that descended on a life when it had finally, honestly, arrived somewhere worth being. He walked her to the door. She went out into the hallway and turned back once, and her eyes were the same eyes they always were, direct and real, and oriented toward the truth of things. And he held her gaze until the elevator arrived and the doors opened, and she stepped in and went upward through the building that had given them the rooftop, and the conversations, and the beginning of everything. He closed the door. He checked the locks. 1, 2, 3. From the bedroom, Ethan's voice arrived, still more asleep than awake. 3, he said. 3, Lucas confirmed. He went to the window one more time. The city did what cities do. It ran its relentless, indifferent, magnificent life. And somewhere inside it, a man who had once fought silent wars in places that no one acknowledged stood at a kitchen window in November and felt, with a precision that required no calculation, that the life in these particular walls, small and complicated and alive with the specific gravity of people who had chosen each other without the benefit of clean circumstances, was the most real thing he had ever been part of. The former soldier who had built disappearance into an art form had finally done the harder thing. He had stayed. He had let himself be found. And in the morning, there would be coffee in the city and a 7-year-old with infrastructure ambitions and a woman who noticed the real things. And that was not the absence of war. It was the presence of peace. And this time, he intended to keep it.